What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Teen Wolf as Scott McCall? The True Alpha. Part 5. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of a true alpha without further ado. As Scott and his pack walked back to their cars after dealing with the fiend, Scott's attention shifted to a pair of piercing blue eyes in the shadows. A coyote was watching them. The coyote panicked and darted away. Scott smirked. "Like I'd let you escape," he muttered before vanishing into the shadows. Lydia frowned. "What's he talking about? And where did he go?" Allison replied. "There was a coyote following us for a while. Didn't you guys sense it?" Styles shrugged. "Yeah, I saw it. But isn't it just a coyote? Why's Scott chasing it?" Allison shook her head. "No, that's not just a coyote. It's a shapeshifter." Moments later, Scott reappeared, holding the struggling coyote by the scruff of its neck. Erica raised an eyebrow. "Is that a shapeshifter?" Scott nodded. "Yes. But she's stuck in this form and doesn't know how to shift back." Styles pointed out. Scott? Her eyes are blue." "I know," Scott replied. "But I don't think she's evil." Isaac asked. "So, how are you going to help her change back?" Scott smiled. "That's the easy part. But first, we should get some clothes for her." Erica nodded. "I have some spare clothes in my car." As they returned to their vehicles, Scott, still holding the coyote, gestured toward the back of the cars. "Girls, follow me." Styles started following them too, until Lydia stopped him. "And where do you think you're going, Styles? Are you a girl now?" Styles grinned sheepishly. "I thought he meant all of us." Lydia rolled her eyes. "Go away." Behind the cars, Scott's eyes glowed red as he locked gazes with the coyote. Then a deep, commanding roar escaped his throat. The coyote whimpered, its body trembling as it began to shift. Scott gently set her down and walked back to the others. Moments later, Allison, Erica, Lydia, and the newly transformed girl emerged. She was their age, with brown hair and a nervous but defiant expression. Styles' jaw dropped. "Whoa, that's her? She's hot." Scott ignored him and approached the girl. "Can you speak?" The girl nodded hesitantly. "Yes." "What's your name?" "Malia," she said quietly. "Malia Tate." Sheriff Stalinsky stepped forward, his face pale with recognition. "Malia Tate? You were in a car accident with your family 7 years ago." Malia's eyes widened. "Yes. I was in a car accident, but I don't know how long I've been here." Noah's voice softened. "We found the bodies of your parents and sister, but we never found yours." At this, Malia's blue eyes glowed fiercely. She growled, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "I don't want to talk about that." Styles quickly stepped in, his own eyes glowing yellow as he positioned himself protectively in front of his father. Scott's eyes flashed red. "Styles, calm down." In one swift motion, Scott's claws pierced the back of Malia's neck. Suddenly, Scott and Malia found themselves standing in a white, empty space. Malia looked around, startled. "Where are we? What did you do to me?" Scott's voice was calm. "We're in your mind. I want you to focus on the night of the accident. We need to see what really happened." Malia hesitated, her voice trembling. "No. I don't want to remember that." Scott placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I understand. But what if you weren't the one who killed them? What if it was someone or something else?" Malia hesitated before she finally nodded. "Okay." The white space shifted, revealing the night of the accident. A car sped down a dark road. Inside were Malia, her father, mother, and little sister. Suddenly, a woman appeared in the middle of the road, firing shots at the car. Malia's father swerved, and the car careened off the road, crashing into the preserve. The scene shifted again, showing the overturned car. Malia crawled out, her body shifting uncontrollably into a coyote. As she fled into the woods, she saw the woman approach the wreckage, gun in hand. Terrified, Malia ran deeper into the forest, her golden eyes glowing in the dark. The vision changed once more, showing a devastated Malia returning the next morning. She found her family dead, their bodies savaged as if by an animal. Overcome with guilt, the 9-year-old Malia believed she was the one who had killed them. Her eyes shifted to blue as despair consumed her. Back in reality, Scott withdrew his claws, and they returned to the present. Tears streamed down Malia's face. "The last thing I told my mom was, I wish you were dead." She broke down, sobbing. Scott pulled her into a comforting hug. "You were 9, Malia. We've all said things we didn't mean as kids." After she calmed, Malia looked up at him. "I'm sorry." Scott smiled gently. "Don't worry about it." Wiping her tears, Malia asked, "Do you think we can find the woman who killed my family?" Scott said, "Yes. And I think she was after you specifically. She'll probably come looking for you again. But for now, what you need to do is stop blaming yourself for what happened." Malia looked at Scott and said, "Thank you for showing me that memory." Scott smiled. "You're welcome. Now, show me your eyes again." Malia furrowed her brow and tried to make her eyes glow but couldn't. "Don't think too much," Scott said gently. "Just let it happen naturally." Malia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. This time, her eyes glowed yellow. Chris's eyes widened. "How is that possible? Her eyes were blue just a moment ago." Scott explained. "Malia believed she killed her family, and the guilt turned her eyes blue. But after we saw the truth in her memories, it turns out she didn't kill them. It was a shapeshifter woman, and I think she's Malia's biological mother." Malia's expression shifted. "What do you mean, my real mother?" Scott said thoughtfully. "You're a born were-coyote, which means at least one of your real parents is a were-coyote. If your mother is one, it's likely that you inherited part of her power when you were born. Female were-coyotes lose some of their powers to their children. I think she's after you now because she wants to take that power back, even if it means killing you." Isaac winced. "And I thought my dad was bad." Stiles shook his head in disbelief. "That's seriously messed up. What kind of mother does that?" Victoria said, "A selfish one." Allison turned to Scott. "So, what are we going to do about Malia?" Scott looked at Malia. "Since she doesn't have anyone else, I think my mom wouldn't mind letting her stay with us. But first..." Scott stepped closer to Malia. "Do you want to be part of my pack?" Malia hesitated. "What does that mean?" Scott smiled warmly. "It's like a family. We protect each other, look out for each other." Malia looked uncertain. "Are you sure? What if I hurt someone?" "You can't hurt us. We're stronger than you. And if you're part of my pack, I promise, you won't lose control again." After a long pause, Malia nodded. "Okay. It's not like I have anywhere else to go." Victoria spoke up. "Scott, why don't you let her stay with us? Chris and I could adopt her." The group stared at Victoria in surprise. Chris blinked. We are." Victoria shot him a sharp look. Chris sighed and nodded. "Yes, we are." Scott grinned. "That sounds like a plan, and I need to give her the bite." Scott addressed the pack. "I'll catch up with you all later. And Boyd, you might want to take a shower. You reek." Laughter broke the tension as everyone headed to their cars. Malia rode with Allison and her parents, while Scott followed in his own car. At the Argent house, Scott gave Malia the bite, and Allison then helped her to the bathroom. Scott turned to Victoria, curious. "I have to admit, I'm surprised. You, of all people, offering to adopt a shapeshifter." Victoria sighed. "Scott, I was raised to hate shapeshifters. I'm not going to lie, I've killed werewolves before, just because their eyes were blue. When you told me guilt could turn their eyes blue, I didn't believe you, until today. I just want to change, Scott. And adopting Malia feels like a good first step." Scott smiled. That's good to hear. Victoria added. And I think Allison would love having a sister. 2 hours later, Allison and Malia returned. Malia looked refreshed. Scott smiled at her. How are you feeling? Malia grinned. Strong. Really strong. I shifted into my coyote form, and it was huge. Allison chimed in, laughing. She's almost as big as a tiger. But she's still a coyote. I thought she might turn into a wolf. Scott chuckled. Well, welcome to the pack, Malia. You feel the connection, don't you? Malia nodded. Yes. After the black liquid stopped pouring out of me, I felt this bond with you and Allison. I can even sense the others who were with us earlier. She glanced at Chris and Victoria. But I don't feel anything with you two. Victoria smiled softly. I haven't gone through my first full moon yet. And Chris is just a regular human. Malia tilted her head. Allison said you are hunters who hunt people like us. Chris nodded solemnly. We are. But only the bad ones. Scott stood up. All right, Allison, explain everything to her. I've got a lot of homework to finish. Allison walked Scott to the door, and they shared a kiss before he drove back home. A few days had passed since Scott and his pack had found Malia. Now, they were sitting together in the school cafeteria, enjoying lunch. Stiles leaned forward. Scott, my dad told me yesterday that they brought in a pregnant woman who'd been attacked. When they asked her who did it, she hesitated for a while and finally said it wasn't human. It was a creature, like a lizard. Allison frowned. The Kanama. Stiles nodded. Yeah. And just now, Dad texted me again, said they found her dead this morning. Someone choked her to death last night. Scott's expression darkened. It's time to deal with Jackson and whoever's controlling him. Lydia, you're coming with me after school to Derek's place. Lydia nodded. Okay. Stiles raised a hand. I'm coming too. Boyd shrugged. I need to head home after school. Isaac, looking a bit sheepish, muttered. I have a date. Stiles stood up. A what? You traitor. Didn't we agree to stay single, me, you, and Boyd? Isaac frowned. I don't remember agreeing to that. Stiles sat back down, glaring. Who's your date, anyway? Do we know her? Erica smirked. It's me. Lydia said. What? How did that happen? Isaac scratched the back of his neck. I asked her out, and she said yes. Stiles turned to Erica. Just like that? If I asked you out, would you have said yes? Erica chuckled. Nope. You're not my type. You've got way too much energy. Stiles groaned. Ouch. That was quick and painful. At least pretend to think about it for a second. Turning to Scott. Scott, buddy, we grew up together. We're like brothers. You have to help me. I need a girlfriend before Boyd gets one. Boyd chuckled. Relax, Stiles. I'm not competing with you. I'm not even looking for a girlfriend right now. Scott smirked. How about Malia? You could ask her out. Stiles hesitated. She's beautiful, but I don't know. What's she up to right now, anyway? Allison smiled. My mom's homeschooling her, so she can join us here next year. Malia hates studying, though. Maybe you could help her with that, Stiles. Stiles squinted. Help her study? You just said she hates studying. How is me helping her with something she hates going to make her like me? Allison shrugged. You need to figure that out yourself. Stiles sighed. All right, but when you say she hates studying, how much hate are we talking about here? Allison smirked. Sometimes, she growls at her books. Like, full glowing eyes and claws out. If my mom didn't stop her, she'd probably tear them apart. Stiles leaned back. So you're suggesting I be her chew toy? Allison laughed. Maybe. But who knows? She might grow to love you, like a dog loves its favorite toy. Stiles nodded thoughtfully. You've got a point. I'll think about it. Scott turned to Allison. What about you? Are you coming with us? Allison shook her head. No. Mom, Malia, Melissa, and I are going shopping after school. Lydia's eyes widened. Shopping? And you didn't tell me. Scott interjected. Lydia, we need to deal with Jackson today. Lydia hesitated. But can't we wait until tomorrow? Scott's tone turned firm. No. He's killing people, Lydia. If you don't want to come, I'll handle it myself. She sighed. Fine. I'll come. After school, Scott, Stiles, and Lydia got into Stiles' Jeep. On the way, Scott called Derek. We need to talk. Scott said. Derek gave them his address, and they drove straight there. When they arrived at Derek's loft, they found him and Peter waiting inside. Stiles looked at Peter with mock surprise. Wow, Peter. You're looking good, way better than the last time we saw you at school. Peter snorted. That wasn't one of my finer moments, I admit. Turning to Scott, Peter asked. What happened to that crazy wench and her pack? Scott smiled coldly at Peter. Dead. He said simply. Peter swallowed hard and stayed quiet. Once everyone was seated, Derek asked. What can I do for you, Scott? Scott leaned forward. It's about the Kanama. We need to deal with it. Whoever's controlling it is killing people now. Derek frowned. What does the Kanama have to do with me? Scott smirked. It's one of your pack, Derek. Derek froze. What? That can't be. Peter raised an eyebrow. It's Jackson, isn't it? Stiles nodded. Bingo. Derek sighed. So what's the plan? Are you going to kill him? Scott shook his head. No. He's just being controlled. We can turn him back into a werewolf. I also want to read his memories to figure out who's behind this. Derek frowned. And how are you going to turn him back? Scott's expression turned confident. You'll see. For now, I need you to call him here. Derek nodded, pulling out his phone and dialing Jackson's number. They sat together, chatting idly, until Jackson arrived. When Derek opened the door, Jackson walked in and immediately noticed Scott and his pack waiting inside. What's going on? Jackson asked, eyeing everyone warily. Scott stood up, his eyes glowing red as he declared, Let's get this over with. He let out a thunderous roar that shook the room. Jackson collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing. Dark green scales erupted over his skin as his limbs twisted unnaturally. Within moments, he transformed into the Kanama, standing dazed in the center of the room. Scott stepped aside and turned to Lydia. Go ahead. Lydia approached the Kanama. Sensing her, the creature lashed out with his claws, but Lydia caught his arm effortlessly. Her eyes glowed fiercely as her own talons extended. She drove them into Jackson's abdomen with precision. Jackson snarled and attempted to strike with his other hand, but Stiles intercepted the blow, holding its arm in place. Lydia began to absorb the Kanama's power, her talons glowing faintly as the scales on Jackson's body began to fade. Gradually, his form reverted to human. As the last of the scales disappeared, Lydia withdrew her claws, leaned close, and screamed. Jackson! With her banshee's voice. Jackson, now fully human, slumped to the floor. His eyes fluttered open, glowing blue, as fur sprouted from the sides of his face. He let out a low roar, no longer the Kanama but a newly turned werewolf. Peter, watching from the sidelines, muttered, How did she do that? Scott replied, She's a banshee. You've heard the myth of calling a werewolf by his name can turn him back to a human. That's what she just did. Peter frowned. But I've never heard of a banshee with claws, and when she called his name, he didn't turn human, he turned into a werewolf. Scott growled, cutting him off. You're asking too many questions, Peter. Peter, shut up. Derek said firmly before turning to Scott. What now? I need to read his memories. Scott replied. Jackson, still dazed, looked up. Scott, what are you going to do? I'll explain later. Just relax. Scott said as he approached. He sunk his claws into the back of Jackson's neck. After a moment, Scott withdrew his claws and turned to Derek. You need to see this too. Derek nodded. All right, Jackson, don't resist. he said before inserting his own claws into Jackson's neck. Moments later, Derek withdrew his claws, his expression dark. Damn it. Styles, impatient, asked, "Well, are you two going to tell us what's going on? Who was controlling Jackson?" Scott said, "It was Matt." Styles's jaw dropped. "Matt? The guy from Derek's pack?" Scott nodded. "Yes." Styles snorted. "Wow, Derek. You really know how to pick him. First Peter, who looks like he'd stab you in the back any second, then a Kanema, and now a psychopath who used the Kanema to attack a pregnant woman. And when the Kanema didn't kill her, he did it himself." Scott turned to Derek. "Are you going to deal with him, or should I?" Derek's voice was resolute. "No. I'll handle it. I gave that monster power. It's my responsibility to take it back." Scott nodded. "All right." Jackson, regaining more of his senses, asked weakly, "Can someone tell me what's going on?" Lydia knelt beside him and explained everything about the Kanema and what had happened to him. Jackson listened in silence before looking at Scott. "Thank you for not killing me, and for helping me." "You didn't kill anyone, Jackson," Scott said. "You were just being controlled." Jackson's voice trembled. "Even so, I still caused harm. Derek, I want to come with you to deal with Matt." Derek agreed. "All right." Scott stood and said, "Then it's time for us to leave." Once they were gone, Peter smirked at Derek. "You're going to kill your beta? That'll make you weaker." Derek shot him a glare. "I have to. He's killing people, Peter." Turning to Jackson, Derek said, "Let's go. It's time to deal with that traitor." He pulled out his phone and called Matt, arranging to meet him in the woods. When Matt arrived, Derek and Jackson confronted him under the dim moonlight. Matt stood his ground, smirking as he confessed, "Yes, I controlled Jackson while he was the Kanema. I made him kill for me, and when he failed to kill that pregnant woman, I did it myself, smothered her to death." Derek's eyes burned red as he growled, "That is not why I gave you the bite." Matt pulled a gun from his jacket and aimed it at Derek, but Derek moved faster, disarming him with ease. He tossed the weapon aside, his voice cold. "I'm not going to kill you yet. Jackson deserves his chance." Derek stepped back, nodding to Jackson. "Go ahead." Jackson shifted into his werewolf form, fur sprouting from his cheeks as his eyes glowed blue. Matt followed suit, his own blue eyes gleaming as he transformed. The two clashed, snarling and trading powerful blows. Fueled by rage and a desire for redemption, Jackson gained the upper hand. With a final powerful strike, he sent Matt crashing to the ground. Derek approached, his expression hard. "This ends here." Without hesitation, Derek plunged his claws into Matt's chest, absorbing his powers and extinguishing his life. Matt's body fell limp, and the glow in his eyes faded. Jackson shifted back to his human form, breathing heavily as he looked down at Matt's lifeless body. Then, the two dug a deep grave in the woods and buried Matt. As they stood over the freshly turned soil, Derek placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "You did well tonight." Jackson nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Thanks, Derek." Without another word, they turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. After resolving the Kanema problem, Scott and his pack returned to their usual teenage lives, going to school, hanging out, and enjoying moments of normalcy. However, tonight was a full moon, and Scott, Allison, her parents, and Malia headed to the woods. It was a significant night for Victoria. It was her first full moon after receiving the bite. When they arrived at the forest, stepping out of their cars, Victoria glanced at her husband with a mix of nerves and excitement. "Wish me luck," she said, her voice steady despite the anticipation. Chris smiled reassuringly. "Good luck." Allison joined in with a bright grin. "Good luck, Mom." Victoria took a deep breath and stepped forward, her gaze lifting to the glowing moon. The transformation began almost immediately. Her golden eyes ignited like embers, black stripes etched themselves across her face, and claws extended from her fingertips. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Allison asked, watching her closely. Victoria flexed her hands, feeling the surge of strength course through her. "I feel incredible." stronger than ever before. And I can feel the connection, to you, to Scott, to Malia, and the rest of the pack. Allison's excitement grew. Can you shift further, Mom? Victoria tilted her head thoughtfully. I think I can. Let me try. Closing her eyes, she concentrated deeply. Moments later, her body began to shift again. Thick orange fur sprouted across her skin, her frame expanded, and within seconds, she stood fully transformed into a tiger. Her massive form dwarfed Scott's betas, but wasn't quite as large as Melissa or Allison in their fully shifted wolf forms. Cool. Allison exclaimed, rushing to her mother and brushing her hands through the vibrant fur. Malia joined her, running her fingers through the soft fur. She looks amazing, Malia said, before adding with a smirk. But not as amazing as my coyote form, of course. Chris approached his now tiger wife cautiously. Victoria, are you okay? You don't feel like losing control or anything, right? Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but only managed to growl. After a few tries, her voice emerged, deep, resonant, and almost melodic despite its inhuman timbre. I'm fine, Chris. Just as Scott said, I don't feel out of control at all. Chris sighed in relief. That's good to hear. Victoria's golden eyes gleamed with excitement. I think I want to run. Girls, care to join me? Allison grinned. Absolutely, Mom. Without hesitation, she shifted into her wolf form. Malia and Chris froze for a moment, staring at the massive white wolf before them, easily the size of a bull, her crimson eyes glowing in the moonlight. Wow, Allison. Malia said, clearly impressed. You're huge. Allison's voice, though lupin, was clear. Dad, you've never seen me like this before. What do you think? Chris stepped closer, placing a hand on her massive head. You're beautiful. Victoria's voice rumbled playfully. Come on, girls. Let's go. I need to see what this body can do. Without saying a word, Malia shifted into her coyote form and darted off into the trees. Laughing, Allison and Victoria quickly followed, their huge forms disappearing into the forest. Scott watched them vanish before turning to Chris. So, do you want the bite? Chris snorted. No. Scott chuckled. What do you have to lose? You'd be stronger, and you wouldn't have to worry about losing control. Plus, you could protect your family better. Just think about it. I'll give you the bite whenever you're ready. With that, Scott turned and headed toward his car. Before getting in, he glanced back. Don't wait here for them. They won't come back, and it's not safe to stay here alone, even for a hunter. Chris nodded, watching as Scott climbed into his car and drove off toward home, leaving the moonlit woods behind. Meanwhile, Melissa had just finished grocery shopping. After placing the bags in her trunk, she was about to get into her car when she heard the distinct sound of a gun being loaded. Without hesitation, Melissa moved at supernatural speed, disappearing from her spot. A bullet whizzed through the air where she had stood moments earlier. Turning, Melissa saw an older man aiming a gun at her. She narrowed her eyes. Who are you? I can tell you're a werewolf, but I don't remember seeing you before. Why are you attacking me? The man smirked. I'm Gerard Argent. Your son ruined my life, and I'm here to kill you. You're Gerard. Melissa's eyes glowed red. Then you're out of luck. If you try to kill me, you're already dead. Even if I spare your life, my son wouldn't. Gerard's confidence faltered as he saw her glowing eyes. Realizing his mistake, his own eyes glowed blue as he shifted into his werewolf form. Instead of attacking, he bolted toward the nearby supermarket. Melissa blurred after him, grabbing his arm. In desperation, Gerard slashed at his own arm with a knife, severing it, and stumbled into the store, shifting back into his human form and shouting for help. Help! Someone cut my arm. Please call the sheriff, he screamed as people gathered around him. Melissa watched from the shadows, her glowing eyes dimming. Sighing, she returned to her car, carrying Gerard's severed arm. She got in and drove away, contacting Scott through their telepathic link. Scott, Gerard attacked me. He tried to kill me, but when I was about to deal with him, he cut his arm and ran into a crowded supermarket. I couldn't follow him there. Scott, already driving home, growled in anger. All right, he's dead tonight. Where is the supermarket? After Melissa told him, she added, "Be careful." Scott replied firmly, "Don't worry." Arriving at the supermarket, Scott found no trace of Gerard. Following his scent, he hit a dead end. Gerard had escaped by car. Scott clenched his fists. That old bastard must be hiding or on his way out of Beacon Hills. If I see him again, he's dead. Gerard drove out of Beacon Hills, his severed arm bandaged. He cursed under his breath. "I lost an arm and nearly my life. I'll have to hide from Scott and his pack for the rest of my life. If I'd known his mother was an alpha, I wouldn't have dared attack her, not without a proper plan." After hours of driving, he stopped at a gas station to refuel. As he stepped out of the car, a hard punch landed on his face, knocking him to the ground. Dazed, Gerard looked up at the woman standing over him. His eyes widened in shock. The woman smirked coldly, stepping closer. "Hello, Dad." Kate looked down at Gerard lying on the ground in front of her. She smiled coldly and said, "Although you tried to kill me after I was bitten, I see you're still alive and kicking after becoming a werewolf yourself. I'm guessing you're not planning on killing yourself anytime soon." Gerard groaned, pushing himself up slightly. "No, Kate. I'm not dying until I've killed Scott and his pack." Kate tilted her head, her smile widening. "So, I take it Scott's the one who cut off your arm?" Gerard stood shakily, brushing off dirt. "Yes. Help me, Kate. Help me kill them, and we can be father and daughter again. Together we can." "Tempting." Kate interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I don't want to be your daughter, Gerard. What I want right now is to kill you." Gerard's eyes darted to his gun, but Kate was faster. She grabbed his arm, yanked the weapon from his grasp, and smirked. "I knew you'd try that. I'm not getting shot by you again. That hurt like hell. But don't worry, Gerard. Tonight isn't about me. It's about you. I'm going to do to you what you taught me to do to werewolves. I hope you enjoy it. Kate, I'm your father. You." She ignored him, pulling out a syringe filled with a purple liquid. Before he could react, she plunged it into his neck. Gerard gasped, his legs giving out as the wolfsbane took effect. "Don't worry," Kate said, crouching beside him. "It's diluted. You won't die, just lose consciousness. I want to take my time killing you." After Gerard lost consciousness, Kate dragged him to his car. After filling the tank, she drove out of town, heading deep into the woods. Eventually, she pulled up to a campsite where 7 people sat around a roaring fire. A muscular black man with sharp features stood as Kate approached. "What took you so long? We only sent you out for groceries and drinks," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "And who's the werewolf you brought with you? I can smell him." Kate handed the groceries to one of the others and smirked. "I walked to town, Michael. That's why I'm late. As for him," she gestured to the unconscious man in the car. "He's my father." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Your father? Gerard Argent? The infamous hunter?" "That's right," Kate confirmed. A brunette Indian woman chuckled. "So, what are you planning to do with him, Kate? Recruit him to our pack?" Kate shook her head, her smile turning predatory. "No, Anika. I brought him here to kill him. And I want to try that dagger of yours, to see if it really lets me absorb powers from other supernatural beings." Michael's eyes glowed red as he gave her a cold smile. "Are you calling me a liar, Kate? Doubting the dagger's power?" Kate's face paled, and she quickly shook her head. No, that's not what I meant." Michael's eyes dimmed, his expression easing into one of amusement. "Good. But you don't get to use the dagger until you take me to the wolf you mentioned. As for your father, wake him up and kill him. I want to see it." Kate hesitated. "You promised I'd get to absorb the powers of the alpha in Scott's pack when I take you to him." Before Michael could respond, a burly man with a bushy beard snarled. "Know your place, wench. We can just read your memories and find the wolf ourselves. We don't need you." Michael growled, his eyes flaring red again. "Darius, I want her in the pack. Do you have a problem with that?" Darius flinched and lowered his head. No, Michael. I have no problem with that. But she's a hunter. She could betray us. She won't. Michael said, his voice icy. She knows what happens if she betrays me. Now shut up before I remind you why I'm the alpha. Darius fell silent, and Michael turned back to Kate. Don't worry, Kate. I keep my promises. But for now, wake up the legendary hunter and kill him. Kate sighed. It'll take a while for him to wake up. I injected him with diluted wolfsbane. An Asian woman named Fujiko stepped forward. Bring him out. I'll wake him up. It's not that hard. Kate hauled Gerard out of the car, dropping him at Fujiko's feet. Fujiko smiled before stomping on Gerard's arm, snapping it with a sickening crack. Gerard woke up screaming in pain. His werewolf healing kicked in moments later, the searing ache in his broken arm slowly subsiding as it began to mend. He looked around and saw Kate standing nearby, surrounded by 7 people he didn't recognize. His gaze locked onto Kate, and his voice trembled as he spoke. You can't kill me, Kate. I'm your father. I only tried to kill you because I didn't want you to become a mindless beast. Kate slapped him across the face. Is that the best excuse you could come up with? Then why didn't you kill yourself, Gerard? Why not go out like a proud hunter? Gerard glared at her, his voice shaking with anger. I've told you, I can't die until I've taken my revenge on Scott and his pack for what they did to me. Kate smirked. Don't worry, Gerard. I'll take revenge for you. Too bad though, I really wanted to torture you, but Michael wants you dead, so goodbye, Gerard. As Kate raised her claws, Gerard's eyes darted to Michael. You're Michael, I'm assuming? Kate's following your orders, which means you're stronger than her. You must be an alpha. Spare my life, and I can help you and your pack. Kate, enraged by Gerard's plea, moved to strike him down. Just as her claws were about to slash his throat, Michael said, Kate, stop. Let's hear him out first. Kate hesitated, glaring at Gerard, but she obeyed and backed away. Michael's glowing red eyes locked onto Gerard. All right, old man talk. What can you offer me and my pack? Gerard straightened himself as much as he could. I have money and weapons, and I'm willing to join your pack and put my resources at your disposal. Michael tilted his head, unimpressed. We don't need weapons, but money could be useful. What I'm more interested in, though, is Scott and his pack. I heard you ranting about revenge. Tell me about them. How strong is Scott? Gerard hesitated. Are you planning to make him and his pack part of yours? A tall, blond man named Alex, who was roasting a deer over the fire, sneered. Old man, just answer the damn question. Swallowing his pride, Gerard continued. Scott is something else. He's fast, faster than anything I've seen. Once he moved behind me, and I couldn't even see how he got there. And he's strong, too dangerously strong. Anika narrowed her eyes. And his pack? Kate told us she only saw one alpha with him. How many are in his pack? Gerard cleared his throat. He has 2 alphas in his pack, his mother and Allison. There are others, but I don't know if they're alphas or not. I do know that Victoria is with them, though she's just recently turned by Derek Hale. Kate's eyes widened. What? She turned to Michael, panic in her voice. Michael, please, don't hurt Allison. She's my niece. I can convince her to join us. Michael chuckled, his grin both amused and menacing. If you can convince her, she'll live. Otherwise, she'll die with her alpha. Michael turned his attention back to Gerard. All right, you can join us. But as a hunter, I want your opinion. How do we take down Scott? Gerard's face hardened. Scott is strong. I'd use someone he cares about against him. The last time I tried, I went after his mother, but it turned out she was an alpha. I barely escaped with my life and lost an arm in the process. Anika tilted her head curiously. Who do you plan to use this time, knowing his mother is an alpha? Gerard thought for a moment. Probably my son, Chris. If you kidnap Chris, Scott, Allison, and Victoria will definitely come for him, and likely the rest of the pack. Kate's expression darkened, anger flashing across her face, but she kept her mouth shut. Michael grinned, his fangs glinting in the firelight. I like it. I'm confident enough to take on this Scott kid, but it never hurts to be cautious and have a hostage. We'll do as you say, Gerard. We're close to Beacon Hills, so we'll spend the night here. Tomorrow, we'll head there, kidnap your son, and draw Scott and his pack into a fight. Once we've crushed them, we'll absorb their powers, and maybe stay in Beacon Hills for good. After all, it does have a nemeton tree. The day after the full moon, Scott and his pack gathered at his house. Melissa had invited everyone over for lunch, and the living room was filled with chatter and laughter. As they talked, Lydia's eyes suddenly glowed. She stiffened, her voice distant and hollow as she said, "Chris is going to die tonight." The room fell silent. Allison and Victoria shot to their feet, both exclaiming at the same time. "What?" Allison rushed forward. "Lydia, what did you just say?" Seeing Lydia unresponsive, Allison moved to shake her, but Scott held her back. "Allison, wait. Don't pull her out of the trance." Allison hesitated, her hands clenched into fists, before sitting back down. "Okay," she said quietly, though her voice was filled with tension. After a few moments, Lydia blinked and returned to her senses. She looked at Scott with panic in her eyes. "Scott, another troublesome pack is coming, and they're strong. Stronger than Cassandra and her pack. They want to use Chris as a hostage." Scott's brow furrowed. "Is that why you said he'll die?" Lydia nodded. "Yes. The vision wasn't entirely clear, but I'm certain Kate and Gerard lured Chris to the Beacon Hills Preserve. They caught him, and during the fight with this pack's alpha, he saw how strong you were. To gain the upper hand, he killed Chris, to make you lose control, or something like that." Allison's face paled. "Lydia, are you sure it was Kate? She said she wouldn't come back to Beacon Hills." "I'm sure," Lydia said apologetically. "I'm sorry, Allison, but it was her. She and Gerard are working with these people." Allison swallowed hard, then nodded. "There's nothing to apologize for, Lydia. I really hoped she'd changed, like she said. But she's just like Gerard. Don't show her any mercy, guys. If I have to, I'll kill her myself." Chris stared at his daughter. "Allison." Victoria interrupted firmly. "You know what Lydia is, Chris. I don't know why Kate would help them kidnap you, or if she even knew they'd kill you. But what I do know is that if we didn't have a banshee in our pack, you'd be dead tonight. We spared Gerard's life, and he went after Melissa. If she weren't an alpha, she'd be dead by now. I won't make the same mistake again." Chris sighed heavily, but said nothing more. Scott turned to Lydia. "Did you see how many are in their pack?" Lydia nodded. "Including Kate and Gerard, there are 9. Styles leaned forward. "And what about what they are? Did you see that?" "Yes," Lydia said grimly. "Except for Kate and Gerard, all of them had red glowing eyes. And their leader, he had a dagger. It felt dangerous. Really dangerous." Scott and his pack sat in the living room, all eyes on Lydia. Scott said, "Forget about the dagger for now, Lydia. Tell me what kind of supernatural creatures those people are. Start with the ones you recognized." Lydia hesitated. "I don't know what Kate and Gerard are. I've known them before, so I saw them as themselves, not as supernatural creatures." Melissa interjected. "Gerard is a werewolf, I'm sure of it." Scott nodded. "And Kate is something like Victoria, a feline. I just don't know what kind. But don't worry about them right now. Tell me about the others." Lydia nodded. "One of them is a werewolf. I saw him in a form similar to Peter's alpha form. Another looked like a brown bear, so I assume he's a werbear." Styles leaned forward. "What about the others? What do they look like?" "There's a woman who had an energy aura around her that resembled a fox with 6 tails." Lydia said, "I think she's a kitsune, and she felt like the most dangerous one after their alpha." Chris frowned. "She's likely a kitsune, and a very powerful one at that. The more tails a kitsune has, the stronger they are. There are 13 known types: heaven, void or dark, wind, spirit, fire, earth, river, ocean, mountain, forest, thunder, time and sound. Do you know what kind she is?" Lydia shook her head. "No, I couldn't tell." Chris nodded gravely. We'll need to be careful fighting her. And kitsunes can summon Oni. Isaac raised an eyebrow. What's an Oni? Victoria answered. An undead demon shadow ninja. Styles looked skeptical. Undead. Victoria nodded. Yes. They can't be killed, but they fear sunlight and can't cross Mountain Ash. That's how they're described in the bestiary. She glanced at Chris. But Chris injured one before. Allison looked at her father in surprise. How? Chris shrugged. It was when I'd just become a hunter. I shot it in the face and shattered its mask. I know I didn't kill it. I'm not sure you can. But I slowed it down long enough for us to get out of there, and I'm not sure why exactly it was injured. Scott leaned forward. What kind of bullet did you use? Chris thought for a moment. If I remember correctly, it was a silver bullet. Do you think silver injured it? Not sure. Scott replied. But it wouldn't hurt to take some silver bullets and daggers with us. Since Lydia believes the kitsune is the second strongest in their pack, Mom, you'll fight her. Scott stood, walked to the chest they had taken from the vampire, and pulled out 2 daggers. Handing them to Chris, he asked, Do you think these are made of silver? Chris examined the daggers and nodded. Yes, they're definitely silver. Scott took them back and handed them to Melissa. You're going to fight that kitsune, Mom. Just in case she has Oni, take these with you. Also, an alpha werewolf's bite is poisonous to a kitsune. Keep that in mind. Melissa accepted the daggers. I'll remember that. Scott sat down again and looked at Lydia. What about the others? Lydia said. One of them is a huge bat with dead bodies around it, and they're moving. Styles asked. Wait, you mean like zombies? Lydia nodded. Yes, it can control zombies. Erica's eyes lit up. I think I know what that is. When I was reading the supernatural books, I came across a creature like that. It reminded me of Lydia because it can use sound-based attacks too. It's an Indian creature called a Vita or something like that. Let me grab the book. Erica went to the bookshelf where Scott kept the supernatural books. After flipping through one, she returned. Found it. She showed the page to Lydia. Is this what you're talking about? Lydia looked closely and nodded. Yes, that's it. Scott glanced at Erica. What does the book say about it? Erica read aloud. It's called a Vetala. In Hindu folklore, the Vetala is an evil spirit that haunts cemeteries and can control corpses. They make their displeasure known by troubling humans. They can drive people mad, kill children, and cause miscarriages, but they can also guard villages. Its weakness is red-hot iron. Scott leaned back. Got it. What about the others in their pack? Lydia continued. One of them is a lion with a scorpion's tail. I think it's a manticore. Victoria nodded. That sounds like a manticore. They're very strong and poisonous, but since we're immune to poison, we should only worry about its strength. Styles turned to Lydia. What else? Lydia frowned. There's one I don't fully understand. It's like a centaur, but instead of a horse body with a human torso, this one has a full horse body with a human torso on its back. Chris's expression darkened. Do you mean the man and the horse are merged? Lydia nodded. Yes. Do you know what it is? Chris nodded grimly. It's called an Aklavi, a nasty, evil creature. It's very strong but has one critical weakness. It's terrified of fresh water. Styles made a face. What does it drink, then? Chris raised an eyebrow. Do you really want to know? Styles quickly shook his head. Never mind. Scott looked at Lydia and asked, What about their alpha? You haven't told us about him yet. Lydia hesitated before speaking. He's scary, Scott. He looks like a werewolf, but his entire body is engulfed in flames, as if he's burning, and he seems to control the fire. Victoria frowned. That sounds like a hellhound. That's troublesome. Lydia continued. There's something else. When I looked at him, it felt like I was looking at 3 people, not one. Victoria's expression darkened. That's even more troublesome. She glanced at Chris. Do you think it's what I think it is? Chris looked uneasy. It shouldn't be. Those things were thought to be extinct. Styles said, "Can you two stop talking in riddles and just tell us what it is?" Chris exhaled and said, "Based on Lydia's description, it might be a Cerberus. But no one has seen one since the Middle Ages." Styles asked, "Cerberus? You mean the three-headed dog?" Chris nodded. Scott asked calmly, "How dangerous is it?" Chris replied, "If it's a Cerberus and also an alpha, fighting it is like battling three alphas at once. And don't forget, it wields fire, very, very hot fire." Instead of looking worried, Scott smirked. "Great. After tonight, I'll be able to control fire too." Chris blinked. "You're not scared, Scott?" Scott shrugged with a grin. "No, I'm excited. Sure, his fire will be a problem, but my healing ability is strong. Plus, I absorbed the power of a frog that can regenerate lost limbs. I'll be fine." Styles grinned, his excitement matching Scott's. "All right then, what's the plan? How are we handling this?" Scott stood and began assigning roles. "I'll fight their alpha. Mom, you'll take on the kitsune. Allison, the manticore is yours. Victoria and Chris, you'll handle the werewolf." He turned to Lydia and Erica. "Lydia, you and Erica will deal with the Vetala. Lydia, since you can fly and use sound attacks, you'll fight the Vetala. Erica, you'll handle the zombies. If you don't want to touch them, use the sword I took from Gerard. It's in the chest." Scott looked at Boyd and Isaac next. "You two will take on the werbear." Finally, he turned to Malia and Styles. "You two will fight the Naklavi." Styles grinned mischievously. "Then I'm bringing a few bottles of fresh water." Chris hesitated. "What about Gerard and Kate?" Scott's expression hardened. "They're both dying tonight. Gerard sealed his fate the moment he attacked my mom. And as for Kate, I spared her life so many times because I didn't want Allison to hate me or feel sad. But I'm sure she's the one who brought that pack here to kill me, even after I saved her life twice. This time, I'll show her no mercy." Allison nodded grimly. "Dad, what Kate did to the Hales was disgusting, but because I loved her, I couldn't let her die. I asked Scott to save her from Peter, and even though he hated her, he did it. Then when Gerard shot her, I shamelessly begged him to save her again, and he did. But now, she's brought those people to Beacon Hills to kill Scott and my pack, and if not for Lydia, she was going to get you killed tonight. I can't forgive her. If I hated her before but couldn't bear to see her die, now I want to kill her myself." Victoria placed a hand on Chris's shoulder. "Allison is right. Kate isn't the sister you remember. She's a monster now, just like Gerard. If you can't handle seeing her die, don't come with us." Chris sighed heavily. "No, I'm coming. How can I stay behind while you and Allison are fighting? As for Gerard and Kate, they've dug their own graves. I won't stop you from doing what needs to be done." Just then, Chris's phone rang. He answered, and Kate's voice came through the speaker. "Hey, Chris. How are you?" Everyone in the room fell silent, listening intently. Chris's tone was cold. "What do you want, Kate?" Kate chuckled. "Can't I call to check on my dear brother?" Chris snapped. "I'm not in the mood for games, Kate. Tell me what you want, or I'll hang up." Kate sighed theatrically. "Fine. I heard Victoria and Allison are werewolves now. I can help you get revenge on the ones who turned them. You've always hated Scott. I can help you kill him and his friends." Chris's grip on the phone tightened. "How? You know how strong he is." Kate's voice took on a sinister edge. "I'm not alone. I've joined a very powerful pack, and they'll help us take revenge on Scott, Derek, and their packs. How about we meet at the old Hale house tonight? I'll introduce you to them. Don't worry, they won't harm Allison or Victoria." Chris played along. "How can you be so sure your pack can kill Scott?" Kate laughed. "Let's just say our alpha is terrifying. You'll see." Chris asked, "What is he?" Kate's laugh echoed over the phone. Now, let's not ruin the surprise. See you tonight, Chris. Bye." As the call ended, Allison's eyes flared red, glowing with anger. That wench is dead. She snarled. Scott patted her back to calm her and said, "Okay, everyone, let's get ready. And remember, though we've learned how to fight, don't get arrogant. Fight smart, and don't hesitate to fight dirty if it keeps you alive." Chris stood up, determination etched across his face. "I need to go home and grab my weapons," he said before turning to leave. Scott nodded and then turned to Victoria and Allison. "You two go with him. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid, like charging in there alone. And all of you come straight back here. We go as a pack, together." Victoria stood. "All right." She agreed and followed Chris. Allison walked up to Scott, her guilt plain on her face. "Scott, I'm sorry. If I hadn't asked you to spare Kate's life, none of this would have happened. They wouldn't be coming after you and the pack." Scott smiled softly, brushing a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. "Don't worry about it. In fact, we should thank her for bringing a few alphas here to help us grow stronger." Allison managed a small smile and kissed him. "I love you, Scott. And I'm really, really sorry." Scott frowned, his tone sharpening. "I don't like your tone. You sound like you're saying goodbye. You're not planning to do something stupid, are you?" Allison tried to deflect. "What? No, I would never." Scott cut her off, narrowing his eyes. "You know what? You're staying here. You're not going with your parents." He turned to Boyd and Isaac. "You two, go with Victoria and Chris. Make sure they come back here." "Got it." Boyd and Isaac said in unison before following the Argents out the door. Allison rolled her eyes. "You're overthinking things. I wasn't planning to go with them and fight that pack alone." Scott raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so I was right to keep you here. You were at least thinking about it, weren't you?" Allison looked away, muttering, "No." Scott smirked, stepping closer. "You know, I can tell when you're lying, even without using my senses. I'll have to punish you later for being such a bad girl." Allison blushed, her eyes flickering with a mix of embarrassment and amusement. "And how exactly are you going to punish me, you big bad wolf?" Scott was about to respond when he felt someone's gaze on him. Turning around, he saw Styles and Malia watching, Styles wearing a ridiculously perverted grin. Styles wiggled his eyebrows. "Don't let us stop you. Keep going. I really want to know how are you going to punish her." Malia chimed in, smirking. "Yeah, me too. This is getting interesting." Allison flushed a deep crimson and quickly darted away from Scott, seeking refuge beside Melissa. She buried her face in Melissa's back, trying to hide her embarrassment. Scott shot Styles an irritated glare. "Don't you have fresh water bottles to prepare or something?" Styles laughed as he darted toward the door. "Oh right. I almost forgot. I'm on it." Malia followed him, calling out, "Wait, dork, I'm coming with you." Styles groaned. "Malia, my name is Styles. Can you stop calling me a dork?" Malia smirked. "Didn't you come to my house the other day to help Victoria torture me with those stupid books?" "Hey!" Styles protested. "I was helping her teach you so you be ready for school next year." "Whatever. Give me your keys. I'm driving." "No way. You're just learning how to drive, and I'm not letting you touch my Jeep. Not now, not ever." As night fell, Chris and Victoria returned to Scott's house with Boyd and Isaac. The entire pack was ready for their next fight. Scott looked at them and said, "All right, let's go." Everyone got into their cars and headed toward the old Hale house in the woods. Inside the old Hale house, Michael and his pack waited. Michael turned to Kate and asked, "Are you sure your brother will come?" Kate smirked. "Yes, he will. He hates Scott, and I gave him the perfect opportunity to get rid of him. He'll take it." Just then, Anika, one of Michael's pack members, spoke up. "Michael, someone's coming, but it's not just one person. I hear 4 cars heading this way." Kate scoffed. "I don't hear anything." Michael's eyes glowed red as he glared at Kate. "She's a Vetala, Kate. Her hearing is far better than any of ours." Without warning, Michael moved lightning fast and grabbed Kate by the throat. Tell me who you called. Why isn't your brother coming alone? Kate struggled to breathe, gasping out. I swear I only called Chris. I told him to come alone. You all heard me when I made the call. Michael listened to her heartbeat, confirming she wasn't lying. Reluctantly, he released her. Kate dropped to her knees, coughing and gasping for air. Michael turned to his pack. If Chris brought people with him, then he didn't come here to talk. I don't know who he brought, but we'll kill them all. Gerard spoke up, his voice laced with unease. And what if it's Scott and his pack? Michael sneered. Then we'll kill them too. I only needed a hostage as insurance, but I'm not afraid of some kid and his pack. As soon as Michael stepped outside, Scott and his pack arrived. Allison and her parents were the first to exit their car. Allison's face was filled with fury as she glared at Kate. Why did you come back, Kate? Didn't you say you'd never return to Beacon Hills? Kate smirked. Not even a hello, princess? Allison's eyes glowed red as she interrupted. Tell me why you came back. Dad already told me, but I want to hear it from you. Kate's smirk faded, and she sighed. I'm here with my pack to kill Scott and his pack, and Derek too. But don't worry, princess, we won't hurt you or your parents. Allison took a deep breath, then smiled coldly. Do I look worried, wench? Tonight, you and your pack will be buried in these woods. Michael and his pack observed Allison and Victoria with cautious eyes, especially Allison. They could feel her strength. Gerard, meanwhile, cowered behind Michael's pack. Kate looked stunned as she stared at Allison, who regarded her as if she were a stranger. Then she turned to Chris. Chris, don't you hate Scott? Don't you want to kill him? Why did you bring him and his pack here? Why are you on his side? Isn't he the one who turned Allison into a werewolf? Chris sighed. I do hate that punk, but what father doesn't hate his son-in-law? Scott stepped out of his Camaro with a grin. Uncle Chris, did you just call me your son-in-law? Does this mean you've finally approved of me? Chris snorted. We'll see. Michael and his pack shifted their focus entirely to Scott as he exited the car. Every hair on their bodies stood on end. When Melissa and the rest of Scott's pack emerged, one of Michael's pack members muttered under his breath. Shit, we're screwed. Michael growled, silencing the man. Shut up, Pedro. Scott, ignoring Michael and his pack entirely, fixed his gaze on Gerard. Old bastard. Scott said coldly. I warned you not to mess with me and my pack. Now you'll pay. Scott's eyes glowed red, and his body dissolved into shadow. In an instant, he reappeared beside Gerard, gripping the older man by the neck. Gerard choked, gasping out. You can't kill me, Scott. Chris will never forgive you. Scott smiled darkly. Don't worry about that. Goodbye, Gerard. Without hesitation, Scott drove his hand into Gerard's chest, ripping out his heart. He examined it with mild curiosity. I thought it'd be black. He mused. Scott released Gerard, who stumbled, barely clinging to life. Scott handed him the still-beating heart. Here, take it. If you find a good doctor, maybe they can fix you. Gerard, desperate and confused, reached out for his heart, but Scott let it drop to the ground. Oops. Scott said mockingly. With one final glare of hatred, Gerard collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Suddenly, Scott sensed danger and swiftly stepped aside as a massive scorpion tail whipped through the air where he had been standing. Scott caught the tail mid-swing, slamming the manticore into the ground with one powerful motion. He looked at the man and said, Be patient, your turn will come soon. Turning into a shadow once more, Scott vanished and reappeared in front of Kate. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her toward Allison and her parents before tossing her at their feet. She's yours to deal with, he said, stepping back to give them space. Melissa approached Scott, her expression unreadable. Scott, worried he might have scared her with his earlier actions, quickly said, Sorry, Mom. Did I frighten you? Melissa shook her head. No, Scott. I just wanted to say that I wanted to kill Gerard myself. Scott chuckled awkwardly. Oh. Sorry about that. Kate, shaken after witnessing Scott rip Gerard's heart out, realized her fate was sealed. Desperation filled her voice as she turned to Allison with pleading eyes. "Allison, please. This will be the last time I ever bother you or Scott. Spare my life, and I swear I'll never return to Beacon Hills. Please, Princess." Allison's expression was cold. "Sorry, Kate. You'll get no mercy from me. Goodbye." Turning to her mother, Allison said, "Mom, take her powers." Kate, in a last-ditch effort, shifted into her were-jaguar form and lunged at Chris, hoping to take him hostage. But Victoria was quicker, grabbing Kate's arm and plunging her claws into her abdomen. Kate screamed as Victoria began absorbing her powers. Kate's strength drained rapidly, forcing her to shift back to her human form. Victoria's eyes glowed a deep orange as the power she absorbed coursed through her, though she did not become an alpha. Victoria drew a dagger from her belt. Chris turned his face away as she hugged Kate and whispered, "I'm sorry, Kate. You're a danger to my family and my pack. I can't let you live. Goodbye." With that, she plunged the dagger into Kate's heart. Kate gasped, her voice trembling. "Sorry, Princess, for everything." Allison stared at her dying aunt, her face emotionless. "Goodbye, Kate," she said softly. Victoria laid Kate's body on the ground and turned to Chris. "I'm sorry, but it had to be done." Chris sighed heavily. "I know. Kate and Gerard made their choices, and paid the price." Scott approached Allison, gently taking her hand. "Are you okay?" Allison bit her lip, struggling to contain her emotions. "No, but I will be." Scott nodded. "For now, why don't you focus on taking care of that manticore that tried to sneak attack your sweet boyfriend?" A small smile tugged at Allison's lips. Her eyes glowed red as she turned her attention to the man with the scorpion tail. "He did try to sneak attack you, didn't he? Don't worry, I will take revenge for you." Michael, the rival pack's alpha, growled, his own eyes glowing red as he stepped forward. "Are you looking down on me, kid? You're strong, but strength isn't everything. Tonight, I'll show you what real power looks like." Scott smirked. "I'm looking forward to it." He turned to his pack. "All right, guys, let's show them the strength of the McCall pack." Styles, wearing a backpack, stepped up beside Scott. "Wait, didn't we agree to name ourselves the Avengers Pack?" Scott frowned. "No." Styles pressed on. "Okay, how about the Justice Pack? Or maybe the Jedi Pa?" "How many times do I have to say no, Styles?" Scott interrupted. "We're not giving the pack a geeky name. Now go find your opponent and take care of him." Styles grumbled. "I was just trying to come up with a cool name for our pack." Then, turning to the rival pack, he added, "So, which one of them is the Naklavi?" Scott smirked. "I don't know for sure, but I'd bet it's the one with the long face and the huge front teeth." Styles squinted at a man with a strong build and long black hair and said, "Now that you mention it, he does have a horse face. And he smells like a horse barn too." The man in question glared at them, his nostrils flaring. Michael narrowed his eyes at Scott and Styles. His expression grew wary. "How do you know he's a Naklavi?" Scott met his gaze. "We don't just know about him. We know what all of you are. Cerberus." Michael stiffened, his expression betraying his unease. "How?" Scott shrugged nonchalantly. "Secret." He stepped forward. "Now, enough talking. Let's fight." In an instant, Scott dashed forward and appeared before Michael, landing a powerful punch. Michael barely blocked the blow, crossing his arms in front of his face. The impact sent him skidding back several meters. Before Michael could recover, a woman wielding a katana charged at Scott. But Melissa intercepted her, delivering a swift kick that sent the woman flying. She crashed to the ground but quickly got up, unscathed, glaring at Melissa. Melissa smiled. "You'll be fighting me, Fox." Allison moved swiftly, delivering a kick that sent the manticore, Darius, crashing into a tree. Then, she followed after him. Darius staggered to his feet, his eyes filled with vigilance as Allison approached him. "I hope you're good at taking a beating," Allison said, her voice icy. "Because I need a punching bag right now." Lydia and Erica stepped forward, locking eyes with Anika, the Vitala. Lydia smirked. We'll be your opponents. Anika sneered in response, opening her mouth to unleash a piercing scream. The soundwave attack hurtled toward them. Stepping ahead of Erica, Lydia let out a scream of her own, the powerful soundwave clashing with Anika's. The two forces collided mid-air, canceling each other out, though Lydia's attack carried slightly more strength, forcing Anika to take a step back. Meanwhile, Boyd faced off against a tall blonde man, his fists landing heavy blows. The man managed to block Boyd's attack, but before he could counter, Isaac darted in from behind and landed a solid kick, sending their opponent stumbling. Another man attempted to attack Melissa, but before he could get close to her, the Kitsune Fujiko shouted, "Pedro, watch out." But it was too late. Victoria appeared out of nowhere, landing a powerful punch to Pedro's face and sending him crashing to the ground. "I'll be your opponent," Victoria declared, her voice cold. Chris stepped up beside his wife, calmly aiming his guns at Pedro without saying a word. Malia glanced around, noticing that everyone had already paired off with an opponent. She turned to Styles. "Come on, dork," Malia said. "Let's take care of the horseface guy." Styles groaned. "Malia, I told you to stop calling me a dork." The horse-faced man glared at them. "My name is Clyde, not Horseface." Styles raised an eyebrow. "Why do you look so offended? Aren't you basically a horse?" Clyde snarled. "I'm an Aklavi, not a horse. And for your information, this is my normal face, I haven't even shifted yet." Styles smirked. "Wait, what? With those big front teeth and that long face, I thought you already had." Clyde growled, his anger boiling over. "Damn you, punk. I'm going to kill you first." With that, Clyde charged at Styles, swinging wildly. Styles dodged at the last second and countered with a punch right to Clyde's mouth. "Ouch." Styles hissed, shaking his hand. "Hitting those giant teeth hurts like hell." Clyde, momentarily dazed, heard Styles' complaint and became even angrier. He charged again, but this time, he left his back exposed. Malia seized the opportunity, landing a devastating kick to Clyde's back and sending him sprawling to the ground. Scott looked around one last time. Seeing that his pack was already engaged in battles with their opponents, he turned to Michael with a grin. "Let's get started. I can't wait to get my hands on your fire ability." Michael focused on Scott, ignoring his pack entirely. He could feel Scott's strength, but he wasn't scared. Instead, he thought to himself, "Once I beat this kid and take his powers with the dagger, I'll be unstoppable. Losing a few of my pack, or even all of them, is a price I'm willing to pay." With that, Michael shifted. His dark brown skin turned pitch black, and his face elongated into a canine-like shape with large, menacing fangs. Steam hissed from his mouth as his body grew taller and more muscular. His claws lengthened, and flames erupted across his body, burning away his clothes. His glowing red eyes locked onto Scott, and with a guttural roar he charged. Scott, still in his human form, didn't flinch. He charged straight at Michael. The two clashed with brutal force, each landing a punch squarely on the other's face. The impact sent Scott flying backward, crashing into a tree and splitting it in half. Rising to his feet, Scott's face was half-burned, and the hand he had used to punch Michael was scorched. However, his injuries healed almost instantly. Scott's pack witnessed the exchange and grew worried. Feeling their concern, Scott spoke to them telepathically. "Don't worry about me, guys. Just focus on your opponents." Reassured by his words and seeing his rapid healing, the pack refocused on their own battles. Scott smiled at Michael. "I like that fire of yours even more now." Michael, shocked at Scott's ability to heal so quickly, hesitated. He had used his flames on supernatural creatures before, and none had ever recovered this fast. Realizing he couldn't fight Michael effectively in his human form, Scott began to shift. Fur sprouted along the sides of his face, his fangs lengthened, and his growl deepened. In an instant, he transformed into a shadow, disappearing from sight. Scott reappeared beside Michael and delivered a solid punch to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Michael rolled across the ground and stood up, but Scott vanished again. Anticipating an attack from behind, Michael turned, but Scott reappeared at his back and delivered a powerful kick, sending him sprawling. Scott glanced at his burned foot, which healed quickly, then attacked again. Blow after blow, he used his shadow teleportation to maintain the upper hand, but despite the relentless assault, Michael seemed to take minimal damage. After knocking Michael down once more, Scott paused his attack. Michael rose to his feet, seething with anger. "Fight me like a man. Stop hiding, you coward." Scott smirked. "If that's what you want, I'll stop using my shadow abilities. But I'm not going to fight you like a man." Scott began shifting again, this time into his full werewolf form. When the transformation was complete, he stood a towering 2.8 meters tall, covered in jet black fur. His wolf-like head glared down at Michael as he spoke in a deep, monstrous voice. "I'll fight you like a beast." Michael stared, stunned by the massive creature before him, and for the first time, fear crept into his heart. He thought about running. Scott chuckled darkly. "I can smell your fear, Cerberus." Michael made his decision and turned to flee. "Trying to escape, huh?" Scott called. "It's too late for that now. You'll never get away." In a blur of speed, Scott caught up to Michael and raked his claws down his back, leaving deep, bloody wounds. Michael staggered to his feet and unleashed a torrent of flames at Scott, but they barely fazed him in his werewolf form. The fire singed his fur and burned him slightly, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Seeing this, Michael growled. "You forced me into this. Now let me show you my strongest form." Michael began to shift again, this time transforming into a massive three-headed dog the size of a bull. Magma-like saliva dripped from the mouths of his three heads, which opened wide and unleashed a fiery blast toward Scott. Scott didn't wait to see if he could withstand the flames. He vanished into shadow, reappearing above the Cerberus. Using all his strength, he delivered a devastating punch to one of the heads, which exploded like a watermelon. Michael whimpered in pain, staggering backward. While the wounds began to heal, the severed head didn't regenerate, leaving Michael with only two heads. Scott smirked. "How about I show you my wolf form?" This time, Scott shifted into his massive wolf form. Towering and powerful, he made Michael's Cerberus form look small in comparison. Without hesitation, Scott lunged, clamping his massive jaws onto the back of one of Michael's remaining heads. Michael tried to counterattack, igniting his body in flames in a desperate attempt to deter Scott. But Scott ignored the searing pain. He violently shook his head, ripping the Cerberus' second head clean off. Spitting the mangled head to the ground, Scott attacked again, this time biting down on Michael's spine. The force of the bite crushed the Cerberus backbone, forcing Michael to revert to his human form. Scott shifted back into his human form and crouched beside the broken and bloodied Michael. "Please," Michael begged, his voice weak and trembling. "Spare my life. I'll join your pack." Scott smiled faintly but didn't respond. Instead, he extended his claws and plunged them into Michael's chest, beginning to absorb his powers. Michael screamed in agony, flames erupting from his body in a last-ditch effort to resist. The fire licked at Scott's skin, but he didn't stop. As Scott absorbed more and more of Michael's power, the flames grew unstable, turning inward and starting to burn Michael himself. Moments later, the fire extinguished, leaving Michael charred and powerless. Scott stood, his body now surging with newfound strength. He closed his eyes, focused, and within seconds, flames flickered to life in his palm, spreading across his body. "Not bad," Scott said with a smirk. "I like it." Scott turned his attention back to Michael, now lying helpless on the ground. A quick dive into Michael's memories revealed the truth. Michael and his pack were ruthless killers, preying on innocents without remorse. They had no wealth or resources of value, save for one thing, an enchanted dagger capable of absorbing the powers of supernatural beings, currently in the possession of the Kitsune from Michael's pack. With a grim expression, Scott ended it. He snapped Michael's neck and unleashed his new fire ability, reducing Michael's body to ashes. Satisfied, Scott turned and began walking back toward his pack, eager to see how they were faring in their battles. Melissa's POV after Scott reassured her that he was fine and she saw Michael's fire barely affect him. Melissa refocused on her fight with the Kitsune Fujiko. Using her enhanced speed, Melissa lunged at Fujiko, aiming to wound her with her poisonous claws. However, Fujiko swiftly swung her katana, its blade shimmering with an ominous energy as it sent a green wind slash toward Melissa. Sensing the danger, Melissa instinctively dodged, but the wind slash grazed her shoulder, leaving a shallow wound. The wound healed almost instantly. Melissa smirked and said, "So, I assume you're a wind kitsune." Fujiko said nothing, her gaze cold and calculating. Melissa didn't need a verbal confirmation. This time, she pushed her speed to the limit, zigzagging unpredictably to avoid Fujiko's strikes. Fujiko unleashed sharp wind slashes from her katana, but Melissa's agility made her untouchable. Closing the gap between them, Melissa struck with her claws, aiming for Fujiko's chest. Fujiko managed to block with her katana, but the force of the clash made her hands tremble. She was stunned by how tough Melissa's claws were. Seizing the moment, Melissa delivered a powerful kick to Fujiko's gut, sending her flying. Fujiko flipped in midair and landed on her feet, but clutched her abdomen in pain. Her fear was evident. She knew she couldn't match Melissa's strength. Desperation flashed in Fujiko's eyes. She flung 6 kunai in front of her, which shimmered and transformed into 6 shadowy oni. Melissa frowned, but quickly drew 2 silver daggers from her belt. The oni turned into shadowy blurs and charged at her. Melissa used her speed to keep moving, preventing the oni from surrounding her. The moment one materialized, Melissa struck with a silver dagger, causing it to explode into shadow and disappear. Fujiko screamed in pain, clutching her head. Melissa grinned. So Scott was right. Silver can kill oni. And judging by her reaction, those kunai must be her tails. If I destroy all her tails, she'll be weakened. Without wasting time, Melissa pressed her advantage, dispatching 3 more oni before Fujiko recovered. The kitsune recalled the remaining 2 oni, transforming them back into kunai and hiding them on her body. "You wench!" Fujiko hissed, glaring at Melissa. "How did you destroy my oni? What are those daggers made of?" Melissa smiled coolly. "You talk too much, wench." Not wanting to prolong the fight, Melissa shifted into her full werewolf form. Her speed increased dramatically, and before Fujiko could react, Melissa appeared in front of her and slashed her with razor-sharp claws, leaving a deep wound from her shoulder to her abdomen. Fujiko staggered but managed to unleash a powerful gust of wind, pushing Melissa back slightly. However, it wasn't enough. Melissa attacked again with relentless speed. Fujiko couldn't keep up, and soon the poison from Melissa's claws took effect. The kitsune collapsed, writhing in pain. Melissa wasted no time. She drove her claws into Fujiko's chest and began absorbing her powers. Fujiko screamed as the process drained her completely. When Melissa finished, Fujiko lay lifeless on the ground. Shifting back into her human form, Melissa closed her eyes and focused. When she opened them, she raised her hand, and a gust of wind swirled around her fingers. She smiled. "I can control wind now. Cool." Just then, Scott appeared, now in new clothes, a clear sign he'd stopped by his car for a change after dealing with Michael. "Good job, Mom," Scott said, offering her a proud smile. Melissa turned to him. "Did you already take care of that Cerberus?" Scott nodded. "Yeah, and I absorbed his fire ability. What about you? What did you get?" Melissa said with a smile. She was a wind kitsune. "I've got her wind abilities now." "That's a good ability," Scott replied. Then, he approached Fujiko's body, rummaging through her belongings. He retrieved a black dagger and her katana. "Is that all you found?" Melissa asked, walking over to check the body herself. Scott nodded. "Yeah. What are you looking for?" "Her tails," Melissa said, frowning. "I destroyed 4, but she hid 2. They've got to be here." Scott examined the dagger in his hand. They probably disappeared when she died. "Maybe," Melissa muttered. Her eyes fell on the dagger. "What's with that dagger?" Scott turned the black blade in his hand, noting the strange golden script etched into its surface. "This is the dagger Lydia saw in her vision. She said it's dangerous." "What does it do?" "Like our claws, it lets its wielder absorb the powers of other supernatural creatures." Melissa's expression darkened. "That thing is dangerous, Scott. You need to hide it." Scott nodded. "I will." With that, Scott raised his hand and unleashed his newly acquired fire ability, burning Fujiko's body to ash. "Now," he said, turning to Melissa, "let's see how the others are doing." Allison's POV after Scott reassured them that he was fine, and Allison saw Michael's fire barely affect him. She refocused on her battle with the manticore, Darius. Her emotions were a storm of chaos. Anger boiled within her at Kate for trying to kill Scott and her pack. Guilt and shame clawed at her for asking Scott to spare Kate's life so many times before, and now grief lingered at her aunt's death. Allison didn't know what to feel, but one thing was certain: she needed an outlet for her frustration. Her glowing red eyes locked on Darius, and without a word, she attacked. Moving with incredible speed, she closed the distance in a flash, unleashing a barrage of punches and kicks. Darius struggled, barely managing to block her relentless assault. Realizing he couldn't win in his current state, Darius let one of Allison's kicks connect, using the momentum to launch himself backward and create space. He started to shift, his head morphing into that of a lion with a thick mane. Fur sprouted across his body as he grew taller and more muscular, claws extending from his fingers. Behind him, a massive scorpion tail lashed menacingly. His glowing red eyes locked onto Allison as he snarled. "It's my turn now, little girl." Darius charged, faster and stronger than before. Allison tried to defend herself, but he landed a brutal punch to her face, sending her flying into a tree. She spat blood as she stood, giving him a cold smile. Her body began to shift, white fur covering her skin as her face elongated into a wolf-like snout. "I think I've played enough. Now let's finish this," she growled. This time, Allison moved too fast for Darius to follow. To him, she was nothing but a white blur before her fist connected, sending him flying and crashing to the ground, rolling several times before coming to a stop. Darius struggled to stand, but before he could rise, Allison appeared in front of him, her knee slamming into his nose and mouth. A sickening crack echoed as his nose and fangs broke. Without hesitation, she grabbed his scorpion tail, leaped into the air, and used all her strength to slam him into the ground. The impact left him embedded in the dirt. As he groaned and tried to push himself up, Allison flipped midair and landed a powerful kick to his face, knocking him back down. Not giving him a moment to recover, she kicked him again, sending him skidding across the ground until he lay face down, unmoving. Walking over, Allison delivered a crushing kick to his spine, breaking it. Then, she plunged her claws into his back, beginning to absorb his power. Darius struggled weakly, his hands trembling as he tried to fight back. But he was paralyzed from the waist down, unable even to move his tail. Seeing his futile attempts, Allison punched the back of his head, silencing his resistance. Soon, his lion-like form reverted to a human state, and his strength drained away entirely. When there was nothing left to absorb, Allison withdrew her claws and kicked his limp body aside. A wave of power surged through her, stronger than anything she had ever felt. She smiled faintly, glancing at her claws. A sudden realization struck her. "I can feel it. My claws can be poisonous if I want them to be." Looking at Darius's broken body, she thought grimly, "It's time for me to take a life." She approached him. His spine had not healed, and he was already dying. "Let me end your misery," she said. Her claws extended as she drove her hand into his chest, crushing his heart and ending his life. The rush of battle faded, replaced by nausea. Stumbling to a nearby tree, Allison vomited. Scott and Melissa arrived moments later. Scott walked over, gently patting her back. When she finished, she looked up at him, wiping her mouth. "Sorry about that," she muttered. Scott brushed her messy hair back from her face and smiled. "It's your first time killing. It's normal. I'm proud of you." Melissa joined them, placing a reassuring hand on Allison's shoulder. "You did good," she said warmly. Allison managed a small smile. "Did you two already deal with your opponents?" Scott nodded. "Yeah. Let me show you what I got from the Cerberus." He walked over to Darius's body and summoned a burst of flame, reducing it to ash. Allison's eyes widened. "You got fire? That's so unfair. I only got poison from the manticore, and it's not nearly as cool as fire." Melissa chuckled, raising her hand to summon a gust of wind that playfully ruffled Allison's hair. "I got wind powers from the kitsune," she said with a grin. Allison laughed. "Styles is going to lose his mind when he hears about this." Scott joined in her laughter. "Oh, he definitely will." Then he said, Let's go check on the rest of the pack. After walking for a while, Scott, Allison, and Melissa found Victoria and Chris standing over the defeated alpha werewolf, Pedro. The alpha lay on the ground, barely conscious and in obvious pain. Scott smirked as he approached, surveying the scene. Looks like you two had fun. Victoria returned the smile. Not as much as I hoped. He was too weak. Chris shook his head. No, he wasn't weak. You're just too strong. When you were fighting, I couldn't even see what was happening, just two blurred shadows clashing. Scott raised an eyebrow. So, I take it you didn't help? Chris shot him a sharp glare but said nothing. Scott chuckled. Like I said before, whenever you're ready, just say the word, and I'll give you the bite. Victoria turned to her daughter, concern evident in her expression. Are you okay, Allison? Was the manticore hard to handle? Allison smiled confidently. No, he wasn't much of a challenge. Scott looked at Victoria and said, Have you absorbed his powers yet? Victoria shook her head. No. Allison told me that those who get the bite first should get the chance to become alphas first. Scott waved her concern away. Don't worry about that. You've earned it. Go ahead. With Scott's encouragement, Victoria didn't hesitate. She knelt beside the alpha and plunged her claws into his chest. As she absorbed his powers, her orange eyes turned crimson red. She stood up, exuding new strength, and looked at Chris. Put him out of his misery. Without a word, Chris drew his gun and shot Pedro in the head, ending his life. Scott stepped forward and used his fire ability to burn Pedro's body to ash. Allison turned to her mother, excitement in her voice. Can you shift into a full weretiger now, Mom? Victoria nodded. Let's see. She closed her eyes and focused. Slowly, orange fur with black stripes grew across her body. Her muscles expanded, and her stature grew taller. Her head shifted into a tiger-like shape, and a long tiger tail swayed behind her. Allison's eyes widened. Wow, Mom. You look amazing. How does it feel? Victoria's voice deepened with her transformation. I feel strong. Very strong. Scott smiled, sensing his own strength increase. Every time one of his pack members grew stronger, he felt the bond amplify his power. Let's go check on the others, he said. Just then, they heard Lydia's banshee scream echoing through the forest. The group moved quickly in her direction and arrived to find Lydia flying with her massive black wings, battling a huge bat-like creature. They stayed back, watching the fight unfold. Lydia dodged a vicious swipe from the Vetala, Anika, and retaliated with a powerful kick that sent the creature crashing to the ground. Anika coughed up blood but quickly got back up, placing her hand on the ground. Moments later, 5 ghouls emerged from the earth, snarling as they rushed toward Erica. Lydia landed next to Erica, who was gripping a sword she'd brought from Scott's house. Lydia, Erica said, her golden eyes glowing. Leave those nasty things to me. You focus on the bat. Lydia nodded. Be careful. With that, she flew past the charging ghouls, diving straight for the Vetala. Erica smirked, rushing toward the ghouls with her sword raised. She quickly discovered that cutting off their heads was the only way to defeat them, as stabbing or slicing their limbs resulted in rapid regeneration. Adjusting her tactics, she began beheading them one by one until all 5 turned to ash. Anika watched in growing panic as Erica dispatched her ghouls with ease. Fighting Lydia was proving equally challenging, and she realized she couldn't win. Deciding to flee, she turned and soared into the air. But Lydia was faster. She slashed Anika's back with her talons, leaving a deep wound. Anika managed to fly a short distance before her body went limp, and she plummeted to the ground. Lydia landed gracefully beside her fallen opponent and stared down at her. Anika, struggling to breathe, looked up in terror. What did you do to me? Lydia raised her talons, revealing a translucent liquid coating them. Nothing much, she said with a smirk. I just slashed you. Anika's eyes widened. Your claws, they're poisonous. Lydia nodded. That's right. But you won't get any rewards. Erica approached Lydia. Go ahead, Lydia. Absorb her powers. Lydia knelt down beside Anika and plunged her talons into Anika's chest, absorbing her powers. As the process finished, Lydia's golden eyes turned crimson red. She withdrew her talons and stood tall, a newfound strength coursing through her. After the fight ended, Scott and the others approached Lydia and Erica. Once Scott ensured Anika was dead and burned her body to ash, he turned to Lydia. "Can you shift into an animal form now?" Scott asked. Lydia nodded. "I think so." She focused, and her transformation began. First, her legs shifted into bird-like limbs, black and sleek, with long, sharp talons. "You look like a harpy," Erica commented, intrigued. Lydia smirked. "I think I can go further." Black feathers spread over her body as her head morphed into that of a crow. She attempted to speak but let out a loud caw instead. After a few tries, her voice returned. "How do I look?" she asked. "You look like a humanoid crow," Allison said, impressed. "It's similar to our full werewolf forms." Lydia nodded thoughtfully. She focused again, this time fully transforming into a massive crow standing nearly 1.6 meters tall with enormous wings. "How about now?" Lydia asked, her voice raspy but clear. "You look like a giant crow," Erica said. Lydia said, "Well, I guess this is it. By the way, I think I can summon those ghouls now, but honestly, I don't want to." Scott raised an eyebrow. "I don't want to smell them again either, but you need to test it. How many can you summon? How much energy does it take? And hey, maybe your ghouls won't stink as badly." Lydia rolled her glowing eyes. "All right, let's find out." She stomped her clawed foot on the ground. A moment later, 10 ghouls emerged, standing silently and awaiting orders. Scott and the others immediately stepped back, covering their noses. "Nope." Scott groaned. "They still stink." He turned to Lydia. "Is 10 your limit? How much energy did summoning them take?" "Yes, I can only summon 10 at a time," Lydia replied. "It didn't drain me much, but I feel like I need a cooldown period before summoning them again. Also, can you try killing one? I want to see if it affects me." Scott approached one of the ghouls and decapitated it with the katana in his hand. "Did you feel anything?" Lydia shook her head. "Nothing." Scott then stabbed his claws into another ghoul's chest, attempting to absorb its power. He frowned. "I can't absorb anything from them," Lydia said. "I'll only use them if I have to. For now, I need to get back to the cars and put on some clothes." Lydia spread her massive wings and flew toward the vehicles. Scott turned to the others. "All right, let's check on the rest of the pack." Scott and his group arrived to find Boyd and Isaac locked in combat with a 2.5-meter-tall werbear. They stayed back, allowing Boyd and Isaac to handle the fight themselves. The battle didn't last long. The alpha werbear was strong, but Boyd and Isaac weren't weak. While one attacked from the front, the other struck from behind, coordinating their movements. Little by little, the werbear began to lose strength, his healing ability faltering as his body became riddled with wounds inflicted by their claws. Finally, the werbear fell to his knees, and Boyd seized the opportunity to secure their victory. With a powerful punch to the face, Boyd knocked the werbear to the ground. The werbear struggled to rise, but Boyd straddled him and unleashed a flurry of punches until he stopped moving. Isaac stepped in, grabbing the werbear's arms to pin him down. "Go ahead, Boyd. Absorb his powers," Isaac said. Boyd nodded, driving his claws into the werbear's chest. The werbear's eyes widened in panic as he felt his strength being drained, but Isaac held him firmly, preventing any resistance. It wasn't long before the werbear shifted back into his human form, his strength entirely drained. Boyd stood, his eyes glowing red, and his body began to change. Dark gray fur spread across his skin as he transformed into his full werewolf form. Standing 2.4 meters tall with a muscular frame, a wolf-like head, and a tail, Boyd's presence radiated power. He glanced at the unconscious werbear before plunging his clawed hand into the man's chest, ending his life. Scott and the rest of the group approached. "Good job, you two," Scott said. "How do you feel, Boyd?" In a deep voice, Boyd replied, "I feel great. Too bad the werbear didn't have any special abilities." Scott smiled. "Don't worry. I'm sure we'll face more enemies. You'll get an ability next time. Scott then burned the werebear's body and said, "Let's go check on Styles and Malia." The group soon arrived at another battleground, where Styles and Malia were fighting the Naklavi, Clyde. Lydia joined them after quickly dressing near the cars, and they all watched the scene unfold. Clyde, in his grotesque Naklavi form, a hideous horse-like creature with sharp teeth and a human torso fused to its back, was on the ground. Malia, in her coyote form, had her jaws locked around the horse's neck, shaking her head violently. Meanwhile, Styles, still carrying a backpack, was relentlessly kicking the human torso's head. Erica smirked. "Those two look like bullies." Isaac chuckled. "I kind of feel sorry for that horse guy." Unable to take any more, Clyde shifted back to his human form, lying naked and beaten on the ground. Malia growled, preparing to attack again, but Styles stopped her. "Wait, Malia. Let's try something," he said, placing his backpack on the ground. He pulled out a bottle of fresh water. Chris said fresh water is a Naklavi's weakness. "I want to see what happens if I make him drink it." Styles approached Clyde, who began to struggle. "No, you damn brat. Don't make me drink that," Clyde said. Styles grinned mischievously. "Seeing you struggle like this makes me want to do it even more." After a few punches to Clyde's face, Styles pried open his mouth and forced the entire bottle of water down his throat. Styles stepped back, watching expectantly. "Why isn't anything happening?" he asked. A moment later, Clyde clutched his stomach, a gurgling sound emanating from within. "Damn you, brat," he groaned. Then it happened. Clyde began projectile vomiting and suffering from explosive diarrhea. Styles gagged, waving his hand in front of his face. "Ugh. It stinks." Malia whimpered and ran to Scott and the others. The group covered their noses, grimacing at the smell. "That's disgusting, Styles," Scott said. "Did you really have to do that? You'd already won." "Sorry. I didn't think this would happen. Gross, it smells like rotten eggs," Styles replied, coughing. Everyone turned to leave. "We're waiting for you near the cars." Erica called over her shoulder and left, leaving only Styles and Scott behind. After a moment, Clyde lost consciousness. Scott called out from a distance, "Hurry up, Styles. Absorb his powers so we can leave this place." Styles hesitated. "What? Absorb his powers? Scott, I don't feel like touching that thing." Scott sighed. "Fine, let's go then." "But I want to be an alpha," Styles protested. Scott glared at him and said, "Who told you to make him drink the water? Now cover your nose and absorb his powers, or believe it or not, I'll beat your ass so badly you won't be able to move, and I'll throw you next to him." Styles groaned loudly. "Fine." Holding his breath, he walked over to Clyde, inserted his claws into his chest, and absorbed the Naklavi's powers. As soon as it was done, Styles sprinted back towards Scott, only for Scott to kick him away. "Stay away from me. You stink," Scott said, waving his hand dramatically. "And lose those shoes too. You stepped in shit." Styles stumbled to his feet, groaning. "You didn't have to kick me." Scott snorted. "That's the price of trying to be funny." Looking at Clyde's body, Styles asked, "What are we going to do with him? We can't just leave him here." Scott smiled mischievously. "Oh, that's easy. Let me show you my new ability." Scott stepped closer to Clyde's lifeless body, raised his hand, and released a burst of fire, incinerating the corpse until nothing but ash remained. Styles gawked. You have a fire ability? That's not fair. That disgusting horse guy had no special powers at all." Scott grinned. "Maybe you inherited his explosive diarrhea ability." Styles glared at him. "That's not an ability, that's a liability." Scott grinned mischievously. "You'll be able to disgust your enemies to death." "Stop scaring me," Styles exclaimed as he hurried to his backpack. He threw it at Scott and said, "Open a bottle and pour it into my mouth. My hands are filthy." Scott laughed. "I was just messing with you, man. Just do it. And you better hope I didn't get his disgusting weakness, because if I did, you'll be the first I disgust to death." Shaking his head, Scott opened a bottle of water and poured it into Styles' mouth. After a moment, Styles sighed in relief. Phew. Nothing happened. I was scared to death. Scott chuckled. Let's get out of here. This place stinks. Wait. Styles said. Before we head to the cars, I need to clean myself. Let's find a stream. They soon found a stream, and Styles said, let me shift into my full werewolf form first. Styles began to shift, brown fur sprouting all over his body. His muscles grew, and his frame became taller, ripping through his clothes. His eyes glowed red as his transformation completed. Now standing at 2.3 meters tall, Styles was a massive brown werewolf with a wolf-like head and a tail. Cool. Styles said in a deep, gruff voice. I feel so strong. He cleaned himself in the stream, then grabbed his phone and keys from his ruined clothes. Turning to Scott, he said, burn those for me, will you? Scott nodded, burning the clothes and shoes before they walked back to the cars. When they arrived, Malia was the first to speak. She glared at Styles, who was still in his werewolf form. Dork, I'm going to kill you for what you made me smell. Styles raised his clawed hands defensively. I'm really sorry about that. I thought he'd lose his strength or something. Malia snorted. I'll deal with you later. What can I do to make it up to you? Styles asked nervously. Malia thought for a moment before replying. Let me drive your car. Styles immediately shook his head. No, no, no. Just go ahead and kill me. Scott ignored their banter and approached Allison and her parents, who were standing near the bodies of Gerard and Kate. Scott felt no remorse for Kate and Gerard's death, but he glanced at Chris and asked, Are you going to bury them? Chris shook his head. No. Just use your fire and burn their bodies. Are you sure? Scott asked. Chris nodded. Yes. Scott ignited the fire in his hand, walked over to the bodies, and turned to Chris. Do you want to say anything before I do this? Chris shook his head. No. Scott looked at Allison, who silently shook her head as well. With that, Scott burned the bodies, reducing them to ash. Then, Scott said, Let's go back home. Everyone got into their cars and drove to Scott's house. Once they arrived, they all gathered in the living room, discussing their battles and the events of the day. However, Allison eventually stood up and said, I'm tired. I need to rest. She headed upstairs to Scott's room. Noticing her sadness, Scott followed her, and he hugged her and said softly, It's okay, Allison. You can cry if you want. At his words, Allison broke down, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. Downstairs, her cries reached the others, and concern spread among the group, especially Chris. After a while, Allison's tears subsided. She pulled away from Scott and, in an unexpected move, shoved him hard against the wall. Scott looked at her in confusion, but before he could speak, Allison stepped closer, wrapped her arms around him, and kissed him passionately. I want to feel something else. She whispered. Scott hesitated. Your parents are downstairs. I don't care. Allison replied. She pushed him against the wall again, and their intense emotions quickly escalated into a passionate lovemaking session. Meanwhile, downstairs, the pack couldn't help but overhear the commotion. Melissa and Victoria exchanged awkward coughs. Erica broke the silence, standing up abruptly. I think I should head home. Isaac stood as well. I'll make sure she gets home safely. Boyd stood up too. I'm leaving. Grabbing Styles, who had a perverted grin on his face, Boyd added, And you should go home too, Styles. Lydia stood and stretched. Good night, everyone. She left without another word. After the room cleared out, only Chris, Malia, Victoria, and Melissa remained. Chris, hearing loud banging from upstairs, furrowed his brow. What's going on up there? Are Scott and Allison fighting? Malia smirked. No, they're having sex. Chris shot to his feet, his face a mix of fury and panic. What? Damn it, Scott. I'm going to kill you. Before he could storm upstairs, Victoria calmly intercepted him. She hoisted him over her shoulder like he weighed nothing. "Let's go home, Chris," she said firmly. Chris flailed helplessly. "No, not my little girl. Let go of me, Victoria." Ignoring his protests, Victoria turned to Malia. "Come on, Malia. Let's go." Malia shrugged, standing up and following them out. After they left, Melissa sighed heavily, shaking her head. "I think I'll spend the night at a hotel." With that, she grabbed her keys, left the house, and drove off in search of some peace and quiet. Scott woke up to find his room in chaos, clothes scattered everywhere, furniture out of place, but his attention was drawn to Allison peacefully sleeping on his chest. A soft smile formed on his lips as he decided to stay still, not wanting to wake her. He thought to himself, "Last night was wild." Moments later, Allison stirred and opened her eyes. "Good morning," Scott said with a gentle smile. "Good morning," she replied, her voice still groggy. Scott tilted his head slightly. "How are you feeling? Are you still sad about, you know?" Allison smiled faintly. "No, I'm okay now. She wasn't the Kate I loved anymore. She'd become a monster. I should have realized that sooner. Let's not talk about her anymore." Scott smirked mischievously. "All right, then should we talk about how wild you were yesterday? I didn't know you had that side in you." Allison's cheeks flushed red as she glared at him. "We are never talking about that again." "What? But I liked wild Allison," Scott teased. "I think I'd like to see her more often." Her blush deepened as she tried to look away. "Nope. You'll never see her again." Scott laughed, flipping Allison onto her back and pinning her down as he started tickling her. She burst into laughter, trying to squirm away. "Stop, haha, please stop. Not until you promise I'll see wild Allison from time to time," he said with a playful grin. "Fine. Just stop." Allison gasped between laughs. Scott stopped and gazed at her, her cheeks flushed and her hair a mess. He gently fixed her hair and said, "I love you, Allison." Her smile softened as she replied, "I love you too." Their lips met in a tender kiss, and one thing led to another as they shared another passionate morning. After a quick shower and tidying up Scott's room, they headed downstairs for breakfast. As they ate, Allison looked around and asked, "So, we're the only ones in the house. Do you think they heard us last night?" Scott raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" Allison's face turned pale. "This is bad. I don't care about the others, but what if my dad heard us too?" Scott chuckled. "Now you're worried? Why didn't you think about that yesterday?" "Shut up," she retorted, glaring at him. "Just tell me how I'm supposed to face him now." "Easy. Act like nothing happened," Scott said with a shrug. "Besides, he won't say anything to you. He'll probably just take his anger out on me. Now let's go, we're going to be late for school." During lunch at the cafeteria, Melissa reached out to Scott telepathically. "Scott, I found a ranch that I think is perfect." "Where is it, and how big?" Scott replied, "It's near the Beacon Hills Preserve, covering about 1,500 acres. Melissa said, "How much does it cost?" "It's a bit pricey, $12 million. But it's worth it. You should come and see it before someone else buys it." "All right, I'll come check it out." Scott agreed. Turning to Allison, he said, "Mom found a ranch she thinks is perfect. Want to come check it out with me?" "Sure," Allison said, nodding. Styles, sitting nearby, chimed in. "What about me, buddy? I want to come too." Scott grinned. "Tomorrow's a school-free day. You and the rest of the pack can come check it out if we decide to buy it." After saying their goodbyes, Scott and Allison left to meet Melissa. When they arrived at the ranch, they found Melissa and another woman waiting for them at the gate. Getting out of the car, Scott and Allison walked over. Melissa smiled. "Hey, lovebirds. Did you have fun last night?" Allison's face turned scarlet as she hid behind Scott, while he remained unfazed. He kissed Melissa on the cheek before turning to the other woman. "Is this the owner?" Melissa shook her head. "No, this is Rebecca, the real estate agent." Scott and Allison greeted Rebecca, who smiled warmly. "Let me show you around," she said, leading them to her car. The first stop was an open field with cattle grazing. "What's with the cattle?" Scott asked. Rebecca replied, "The owners want to sell the herd along with the ranch." "How many are there?" "It's a herd of 140 Angus cattle," Rebecca explained. "This is primarily a beef ranch. There's also a smaller flock of sheep, about 60, but they were only added recently." As they drove further, a grand mansion came into view. Rebecca gestured toward it. "That's the main house, 8,000 square feet, 2 stories, 10 bedrooms, and 7 bathrooms. It's fully equipped for comfort and luxury." Scott and Allison exchanged a look of curiosity and excitement as they followed Rebecca into the mansion. After exploring Scott and Allison nodded in satisfaction. Rebecca smiled. "Now, let me show you the lake house." Scott raised an eyebrow. "There's a lake here?" Rebecca nodded. "It's an artificial lake, about 5 acres in size." Scott smirked. "So, a pond?" Rebecca laughed. "Technically, yes. But it's deep, stocked with fish, and has its own charm. Trust me, you'll love it." She drove them to the lake, where the serene water reflected the sky like a mirror. Nestled near the shore was a charming 3,000 square foot lake house with large windows and a wraparound porch. Scott and Allison explored the property, taking in the peaceful surroundings. "This is perfect," Allison said. Rebecca added, "The ranch is fully operational. It's equipped for cattle ranching and includes all the necessary equipment. It's not just a home, it's a business." Originally priced at $16 million, the owners are now asking for $12 million. Scott frowned slightly. "That's a big drop. Did they tell you why they're selling?" Rebecca hesitated, then sighed. "Yes. 2 days ago, the owner, his wife, and his brother called me here and asked me to sell the ranch for $15 million. They told me there's been a creature stealing their cattle. When they tried to ambush it and kill it, they discovered it was a massive dog, or wolf-like creature with no fur and glowing eyes. They said their rifles couldn't penetrate its skin. They believe it's a chupacabra and insisted I inform any potential buyers about it because they didn't want to have a guilty conscience." Allison raised an eyebrow. "A chupacabra?" Rebecca nodded. "That's what they called it. This morning, they called me and asked to meet downtown. When I saw them, they looked terrified and asked me to lower the price to $12 million and sell the ranch quickly. They told me they heard terrifying roars and sounds of a beast fighting in the woods last night." Scott, Allison, and Melissa exchanged knowing looks, realizing the ranch owners had likely overheard their battle with the Cerberus pack the night before. Scott cleared his throat. "We'll buy the ranch." Rebecca smiled. "Great. Let's go meet the owners. They're in town waiting for us." The purchase went smoothly, with Melissa's name added to the deed as the official owner. The previous owners, visibly relieved, quickly packed their belongings and left Beacon Hills. Back at home, the three sat in the living room. Scott chuckled. "You know, if I'd shown up in my werewolf form and scared them a little more, we might have gotten the ranch for less." Melissa shot him a stern look. "No, Scott. They seemed like good people, and $12 million for that ranch is already a bargain." Scott nodded. "You're right. By the way, Mom, what are you planning to do with the cattle and sheep herds?" Melissa smiled. "Since I quit my job as a nurse, I don't have much to do except learning from Deaton occasionally. I'm going to keep the cattle and see if I can become a successful beef rancher. It's a good business, and more importantly, I love it." Scott returned her smile. "I love animals too. Let's make it a family business and give it our best shot." Allison grinned. "Count me in. But we should probably deal with that chupacabra or whatever it is first." Scott nodded. "We'll move there tomorrow, and then we'll handle it." Melissa stood up. "All right, let's start packing." Scott paused. "What are you going to do with this house, Mom?" Melissa thought for a moment. "Maybe sell it, unless you want to keep it." Scott shook his head. "No, just sell it." The next day, with the pack's help, Scott and Melissa moved into their new home. To celebrate, Scott butchered a bull, and they hosted a barbecue. Chris and Victoria joined the gathering. While everyone was in good spirits, Chris couldn't stop glaring at Scott. Sensing the tension, Scott walked over with a grin. "What do you think, Uncle Chris? This ranch is a great place to raise kids, don't you think? You and Victoria could build a house here and move in to help us raise your future grandchildren." Chris's jaw tightened. "That's it. I'm going to kill you, you little punk." Scott laughed and bolted toward Allison, shouting, "Allison, help. Your dad wants to kill me." The pack erupted into laughter as Chris gave chase, muttering threats under his breath. The night after they moved to the ranch, the pack gathered in the living room of the new house, and Melissa said, "Scott and I have decided to make this beef ranch a successful business," she announced. Isaac smiled. "Since I'm part of this family, I'll help too." Boyd nodded in agreement. "I'll quit my part-time job and pitch in here as well." Scott grinned. "Good to hear. But first, we need to deal with the chupacabra or whatever that thing is." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "What chupacabra?" Melissa explained. "The previous owners said there's a huge wolf-like beast with no fur that's been killing their cattle. That's why they sold the ranch." Scott looked around. "So, who's going to deal with it?" Stiles pointed at him. "Aren't you coming?" Scott shook his head. "No, it's probably just a weak monster, like that boar or those creatures we ran into in the woods before." Stiles smirked. "Then leave it to me, I'll take care of it." "I'll go too." Malia chimed in. Scott nodded. "Okay, but be careful. If it's too much to handle, call for backup." With that, Malia and Stiles headed into the woods, tracking the chupacabra. It didn't take long before they caught its scent. Malia's nose wrinkled. "Oh, I know this smell. It belongs to a scary coyote." Stiles frowned. "You've seen it before?" Malia nodded. "Yes. Once, I was eating a deer I hunted, and that thing showed up. It was big." "How big?" Stiles asked. Malia thought for a moment. "Almost as big as Allison's wolf form, but it had no fur. Its body was skinny, and its eyes were white." Stiles tilted his head. "It didn't attack you?" "It did," Malia replied. "But I was faster. I ran away. Since then, whenever I smell it, I keep my distance, not because I'm scared, but because I thought it was sick and didn't want to catch whatever it had." As they talked, they spotted the chupacabra lying near a cave. Malia's eyes glowed golden. "Stiles, let me handle this. That thing bullied me before, and now it's time for revenge." Stiles shrugged. "Okay." Malia stepped forward, glaring at the beast. "Do you remember me?" she growled. Then, to Stiles' shock, she began stripping off her clothes. What are you doing?" Stiles stammered. Malia glanced at him. "I want to fight it in my coyote form, and I don't want to ruin my clothes when I shift." Stiles turned away, blushing. "Malia, you can't just get naked in front of people." She smirked. "Oh? Do you like what you see?" "No." Stiles protested, his face redder than ever. Malia raised an eyebrow. "So, you think I'm ugly?" "That's not what I meant." Stiles blurted. Malia walked over, unabashedly confident. "What did you mean, then?" Stiles stammered. I mean, you're beautiful, but I didn't see anything." Malia chuckled. "Stiles, I lived naked in the woods for years. You can look if you want, I don't care." Stiles locked eyes with her. "But I care. You can't just get naked in front of people." Malia tilted her head. "Why are you so worked up? It's my body. I can do what I want. Why do you care anyway?" Taking a deep breath, Stiles replied. "Because I like you. I want to date you. But I don't want my girlfriend getting naked in front of other guys." Malia smiled mischievously and wrapped her arms around his neck. "So you want to date me, dork?" Feeling her close, Stiles blushed even more. "Yes. Would you go out with me?" She winked. "I'll think about it." Turning back toward the chupacabra, she froze. "Where did it go?" Stiles shrugged. "I don't know, I was looking at you the whole time." Malia sniffed the air. I can still smell its scent. Grab my clothes and follow me. She shifted into her coyote form and darted into the woods, with Styles hurrying after her. After some time, they caught up with the creature. This time, Malia didn't hesitate. She lunged at it, her speed and strength overwhelming the chupacabra. Just as she was about to kill it, Styles called out, "Wait, Malia. Absorb its power first." Malia paused. "But it's weak." "I know," Styles said, "but it's better than nothing." Malia shifted back to her human form and plunged her claws into the chupacabra's body, absorbing its powers. Once she was done, she killed it swiftly. Turning to Styles, she caught him staring at her naked body. She smirked and said, "Have you seen enough?" Styles, momentarily dazed, replied absently, "No, I could look at you all day, and it would never be enough." Even Malia, who was usually unbothered by nudity, felt her cheeks flush under his intense gaze. She rolled her eyes, smacked him lightly on the head, and said, "Give me my clothes, you pervert." Taking her clothes from him, she went behind a tree to get dressed. Snapping back to reality, Styles muttered, "Damn, I can't believe I just said that." When Malia returned fully dressed, she smirked and teased, "Let's go back, you perverted dork." Scratching the back of his head, Styles asked, "So, do you want to go on a date with me?" Malia smiled and replied, "Okay." Styles fist pumped the air and shouted, "Yes. Finally, I'm going to have a girlfriend." Malia rolled her eyes. "Keep shouting like that, and I might change my mind." "You can't take it back, you already said yes." Styles grinned, running to her, scooping her up onto his shoulder. "What are you doing, you idiot?" Malia protested. "Where are you taking me?" "I'm taking you on a date, right now." Styles announced, "You like deer, right? Let's go deer hunting." Malia smirked. "I like the way you think." Styles added, "But we're not eating it raw. We'll take it back to the ranch and cook it properly." "Relax," Malia said with a smile. "I might love deer, but raw isn't my style anymore." When they returned to the ranch, Styles was carrying a large stag over his shoulder. They found Scott and the pack sitting around a bonfire. Scott raised an eyebrow. "Styles, did you two handle the chupacabra? And what's with the deer?" Styles grinned. "Yep. Malia took care of the chupacabra. It was a huge, hairless coyote. As for the deer, I took Malia on a date, and we hunted it." Scott blinked. "A date?" Styles' grin widened. "Yep. I asked her out, and she said yes." Suddenly, Styles froze. "Wait, why do I feel like I'm in danger?" Scott chuckled and pointed toward Chris. "Well, you did just kidnap his adopted daughter, so he'll probably come after you with a crossbow or something when he's got nothing better to do." Chris stood up and approached Styles, smiling in a way that wasn't entirely reassuring. "Styles, how about you and I have a little chat?" Styles gulped. "I'd love to, but unfortunately, I have a deer to skin." Chris put a hand on Styles' shoulder. "Don't worry. I'll help you with that." Without waiting for a response, Chris guided a nervous Styles toward the meat processing area of the ranch. As he was being led away, Styles shot Scott a pleading look. "Help." Scott laughed and said, "You'll be fine, buddy." The rest of the pack burst into laughter as Styles disappeared with Chris. Not long after, Styles came rushing back, panic written all over his face. "Scott, my dad's been attacked. He's in the hospital." Melissa stood up immediately. "How is he? Is it bad?" Styles took a shaky breath. "The deputy who called me said he has a few broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and he's in a coma." Melissa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Styles. He'll be okay." Scott stood. "Let's go to the hospital." The pack quickly left for the hospital, determined to uncover what had happened. The pack arrived at Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital, their mood tense as a nurse led them toward Sheriff Stalinsky's room. When they entered, they found Noah awake, sitting up slightly in bed with a look of mild annoyance at being confined. "Dad," Styles said, rushing to his side. "You're awake." Noah gave his son a weak smile. I'm awake. Don't worry, son, I'm fine. Styles frowned, his worry evident. You're not fine, Dad. You've got broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder, and you were in a coma. Noah saw the concern in his son's eyes and softened his tone. I'm all right now, Styles. Sure, my ribs and shoulder hurt, but nothing that won't heal with a little time. Scott and the pack gathered around the bed, each offering their support. Once they were sure Noah was okay, Styles leaned forward, his usual humor replaced by determination. What happened, Dad? What got you in here? Noah's face darkened as he recounted the events. We were investigating a murder case, me and Deputy Howards. The scene was strange. The bodies were covered in mud. He paused, taking a shaky breath. We split up to cover more ground. That's when I saw it. A humanoid monster made of mud. Mud? Styles asked, frowning. Yeah, mud or clay, or whatever you want to call it. No matter how much I shot at it, nothing happened. Then it hit me hard with a punch to my chest, and sent me flying into a wall. That's how I ended up with these broken ribs. But just before I passed out, I managed to get in one lucky shot to its head. The thing dissolved, turned back into mud. That's the last thing I remember before waking up here. Chris, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. What you're describing sounds like a golem. They're humanoid creatures made from clay and are usually controlled by someone else. They're nearly indestructible unless you destroy their core. Once the core is gone, the golem crumbled into harmless mud. The core can be anywhere in its body, though. You were lucky it was in its head. Scott frowned. So you think someone was controlling the one that attacked Uncle Noah? Chris nodded. It's highly likely. Golems are like puppets. They don't act on their own. Scott turned back to Noah. Where did this happen? Noah gave them the address of an abandoned warehouse downtown. After making sure Noah was comfortable and ensuring Melissa, Victoria, and Chris would stay behind to protect him, Scott turned to his pack. Let's hunt the one controlling this thing. Arriving at the warehouse, the pack immediately picked up the intertwined scents of Noah, the deputy, and the golem. But there was another unfamiliar scent, leading away from the scene. They followed it through the city until it led them into the dense woods of the Beacon Hills Preserve. Their search ended at the entrance of a dark cave. Scott motioned for silence, and they moved cautiously inside. As they stepped further into the cave, the ground trembled. Without warning, the entrance collapsed behind them, trapping them in darkness. Everyone okay? Scott called out. After confirming no one was hurt, the pack used their combined strength to break through the debris, emerging into the open air. Waiting for them outside were 4 towering golems. Perched high on a tree branch above them sat a short figure, grinning wickedly. The creature, barely 3 feet tall, had a large nose and an unkempt beard that reached his waist. Scott narrowed his eyes. Are you the one killing people in town with mud? The small figure cackled and jumped down. Yes. They laughed at my size, so I made sure they never laughed again. Styles stepped forward, anger burning in his eyes. Did you attack the sheriff? The short man snorted, but said nothing. Allison tilted her head, her tone curious. You wouldn't happen to be a gnome, would you? The small figure smirked, puffing out his chest. Yes, I am a gnome. Are you fascinated by how handsome I am? Do you want to be my wife? Lydia smiled and said, Scott, it looks like you have some competition. The pack burst into laughter. Even Scott chuckled, unable to even get angry as the gnome flirted with Allison. The gnome's face twisted in fury at their laughter. You'll regret mocking me, you little shitheads. With a wave of his hand, the gnome commanded the golems to attack. But Boyd and Isaac were ready. Using their enhanced strength and speed, they located the cores of the golems and destroyed them one by one. The clay creatures crumbled into harmless mud at their feet. Styles stepped forward, his eyes glowing red. This one's mine. He attacked my dad. So, I'll handle him myself. The pack nodded and stepped back, giving Styles room. Styles charged forward, and the gnome sneered, raising a wall of earth between them in an attempt to defend himself. But Styles' punch shattered it effortlessly. The small creature retaliated with sharp arrows of stone, but Styles dodged them with ease, his movements a blur of speed. Damn it. The gnome cursed, preparing another attack. Too slow. Styles said, appearing in front of him in an instant. Before the gnome could react, Styles delivered a powerful punch to his face, sending him flying into a tree. The gnome slumped unconscious at its base. Walking over to his defeated foe, Styles smirked. Too weak. But I'll admit, your powers are kind of cool. Scott approached, thoughtful. Do you want his abilities, Styles? Styles paused for a moment, then shook his head. Nah. I've got my sights set on fire or thunder. Someone else can take this one. Scott turned to the pack. All right. Isaac, Erica, and Malia, it's your choice. His powers won't make you alphas, but you'll gain Earth-based abilities. Erica shrugged. Earth powers are cool, but not really my thing. Malia shook her head. I'll pass. Isaac thought for a moment before glancing at Boyd. Earth isn't really my favorite element, but Boyd's been talking about it since the day we learned we could absorb abilities. Let him have it. Scott nodded. In that case, Boyd, it's yours. Boyd grinned, stepping forward. Thanks, guys. He knelt beside the unconscious gnome, extending his claws. As Boyd began absorbing the gnome's powers, the creature stirred briefly, struggling, but Boyd's strength was too much. When the process was complete, the gnome's body went limp. Scott ended the gnome's life with a decisive blow, then used his fire ability to burn the body to ash. Styles turned to Boyd. So, can you do what he did? The golems, the earth magic tricks. Boyd said. Let me try. After concentrating for a moment, he placed his hand on the ground. A small golem, barely a foot tall, emerged from the earth. Boyd's face lit up with a wide smile as he admired his new ability. I need to practice more to create bigger golems that can actually fight, he said, clearly excited. Scott clapped him on the shoulder. Good. Let's head back. As they made their way through the woods, Styles walked beside Scott. Hey, Scott. I think it's time to give my dad the bite. He almost died today. Scott nodded. I think so too. Let's talk to him. Back at the hospital, they told Melissa and the others about the gnome. Then Styles turned to his father. Dad, I think it's time you take the bite from Scott. I almost lost you today. I can't let that happen again. Noah frowned. Are you sure, Styles? What if I lose control and hurt someone? Scott stepped forward, his tone reassuring. Uncle Noah, I promise you won't lose control. You'll be stronger, faster, and able to do your job better. It's your choice, but I think it's the right one. Noah sighed, his expression conflicted. Finally, he nodded. All right, Scott. Go ahead. Scott's eyes glowed red as he approached. He bit Noah, then stepped back. You should probably discharge yourself from the hospital tonight. Your body will start changing soon, and by tomorrow, all your injuries will be healed. Styles added. Yeah, Dad. We should go home before the doctors notice anything weird. Noah nodded, his expression calm. I see. Let's do that. Scott turned to Styles. Take care of your dad. We'll head out now. Good night. Styles smiled faintly. Good night, guys. With that, Scott and the pack left the hospital, leaving Styles and Noah behind. Noah woke up in his room the next day feeling stronger than ever. His injuries were completely healed, and his body was filled with newfound energy. Before he could fully process the changes, he heard Styles sleep-talking. His son was slumped in a chair beside the bed, in an awkward position, mumbling nonsense and trying to kiss the empty air. Noah shook his head with a smile. Styles, wake up. You're going to be late for school. Styles jolted awake, flailing as he fell from the chair. He quickly scrambled to his feet. What? I wasn't doing anything. Wait, where am I? And where's Malia? Noah cleared his throat, amused. Styles finally noticed him and remembered that he was in his dad's room. After they got back from the hospital yesterday, he had wanted to make sure his dad was okay after getting the bite, so he stayed next to his bed. Dad, how are you feeling? Are your injuries healed? Noah stretched his arms and nodded. I feel great. My body is full of energy, my vision and hearing are sharper than ever, and all my injuries are completely gone. Styles grinned. That's good to hear. Just wait until your first full moon. And when you become an alpha, you'll be even stronger. Noah smirked. I'm looking forward to it. But for now, go get ready for school before you're late. Styles held up a finger. Wait, before that, show me your claws. With some guidance, Noah tried to extend his claws. After a few attempts, he succeeded. Styles examined them, noticing they were long, curved, and unlike anything he had seen before. Huh, these aren't wolf claws. They don't look like Lydia's or Victoria's either. Noah inspected them and nodded. These are bear claws, son. Styles' eyes widened. Wait, does that mean you're a werebear? I wasn't expecting that, but honestly, that's kinda awesome. A month later, Scott and the pack witnessed Noah's first full moon. He shifted into a massive brown bear, the size of a polar bear. Time passed quickly. Scott and his pack didn't encounter any new supernatural threats, and before they knew it, sophomore year had come to an end. During the first month of summer break, the pack helped Scott and Melissa manage the ranch. Eventually, Malia, Allison, and her parents left for France to spend their vacation there. Scott gave Melissa and Lydia some money for a month-long vacation, and when they returned, he did the same for Isaac, Erica, and Boyd. Meanwhile, Scott and Styles traveled to France, where they met up with Allison and Malia. The four of them spent 3 weeks exploring Europe before returning to Beacon Hills. Now Scott, Melissa, and Allison were at the ranch. Melissa sighed. Well, after working so hard on this ranch since we bought it, I think it's safe to say, this business isn't worth it. We only made $60,000 in 6 months, and for all that effort, I don't think it's worth continuing. Scott chuckled. It was a good adventure, though. So what are you going to do now? Melissa leaned against the fence, thinking. Don't get me wrong, I love having the animals around. But as a business, it's not sustainable. I'll keep a few cows and sheep for milk and meat, but I'm selling the rest. Scott nodded. As long as you're happy. As for making money, I think we should invest in real estate and stocks instead. Melissa raised an eyebrow. Just be careful and don't lose everything on bad deals. Scott smirked. Don't worry, Mom. I'm not stupid. By the way, did anything happen while I was in Europe? Melissa's expression grew serious. I heard from Deaton that Derek has been looking for you. And Noah told me the animals in Beacon Hills are acting strangely. Lydia and I went with Deaton to the woods and found a lot of dead animals. Deaton believes they killed themselves intentionally. Allison frowned. How can he be so sure they killed themselves? Melissa sighed. That part was easy. We found 12 deer dead after jumping off a cliff. Noah also heard from a farmer that his entire herd of pigs went insane one night and started killing each other. And one evening, Lydia and I were sitting on the porch of the lake house when we felt someone watching us from the woods. But when we turned our heads, whoever it was disappeared before we could see them. Before we could investigate, the animals on the ranch suddenly started screaming and going wild. Luckily, I roared at them, and they stopped. Though, they were scared of me for a few days afterward. Allison asked. But why would animals kill themselves? Melissa shrugged. I don't know. Deaton said that sometimes animals kill themselves when they're scared or stressed. And he mentioned that some species of social insects will commit suicide as an act of altruism. These insects sacrifice themselves if the colony is in danger, to alert others. Deaton thinks the behavior we're seeing in the animals might be nature's way of warning us about something. Scott looked thoughtful. And what do you think, Mom? Melissa said. I think they're terrified. That night when the animals at the ranch went crazy, all I could feel from them was pure terror. And whoever was watching me and Lydia that night, it was evil. Allison frowned. Why do you say that? Melissa explained. When Lydia and I realized someone was watching us, we felt disgust, followed by an overwhelming urge to kill. It was just like with Cassandra. Did you feel any danger? Scott asked. Melissa shook her head. No. Scott thought to himself. It must be Jennifer and the Alpha Pack that's come to Beacon Hills. He said aloud. I'll tell the pack. We should take care of this before things escalate. Allison asked. Isn't there something in the supernatural books about animals killing themselves? Melissa nodded. There is, but all it says is that fear is the most likely cause. Scott said. Don't worry about it for now. We'll find whoever is responsible soon enough and deal with them. Right now, I'm going to see what Derek wants. Allison said. I'm coming with you. As they drove to Derek's loft, Allison sighed. Looks like we're dealing with another crazy monster again. Scott smiled. Don't act like you didn't miss fighting supernatural creatures. She smiled back. I won't lie, I missed it. But not the part where innocent people die. Scott nodded. I hate that part too. But this is our world now, and we'll save as many people as we can. Allison agreed. Yes. When they arrived at Derek's loft, Derek let them in, and they found Peter there as well. Scott sat down with Allison and asked, My mom said you were looking for me? Derek nodded. Yeah, I need your help. With what? Derek explained. Josh and Jackson have been missing for 2 months now. I was hoping you could help me find them. What about the girl from your pack? Scott asked. Where's she? She left Beacon Hills with her parents. Derek replied. Allison frowned. How do you know Josh and Jackson are missing and didn't just leave town? Derek sighed. They disappeared without telling anyone, not even their parents. Their families have been searching for them for 2 months, but no one's heard from them or seen them. Scott already knew the Alpha Pack had kidnapped them but didn't say anything. Instead, he asked, Do you have any clues? Peter, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We think a new pack in town kidnapped them. Scott pretended to be surprised. A new pack? Derek nodded. Yes, a pack of alphas. Their leader is Deucalion. Scott raised an eyebrow. Oh, you mean the demon wolf? Wasn't he friends with your mother? Why would he attack your pack? Derek said bitterly. I'm guessing he wants me to join his pack. I see, Scott said. Then he smirked. Do you know how many are in his pack? Derek hesitated, confused by Scott's reaction. Aside from Deucalion, I know of 2 others, Ennis and Callie. I don't know if he has more. Allison looked at Scott and said, Only 3, but we need 4 alphas. Scott chuckled. I bet they have more than just 3. Allison asked eagerly, Should we hunt them tonight? Scott shook his head. No. First, we'll catch one of them, read their memories, and help Derek find his lost puppies. Then, we'll deal with Deucalion and his pack, maybe have a little fun with them first. Peter interjected. You're underestimating Deucalion and his pack too much. Scott's eyes flashed crimson as he turned to Peter. Do you think he can beat me, Peter? Peter paled, realizing his mistake. No, of course not, Scott. I just meant you should be careful. He's strong, that's all. Scott ignored him and turned back to Derek. Do you know where they are? Derek shook his head. No, I haven't seen them yet. But I found their symbol on my door, here and at the old house in the woods. Scott stood up and said, Well, when you find one of them, let me know. For now, we need to go. School starts tomorrow, and we still haven't bought our supplies. Allison stood up with a smile and said, I forgot about that. Oh, and can we shop for some clothes too, please? Scott sighed and said, How about you call Lydia and the rest of the girls to go shopping with you? I'll pay, just spare me, please. Allison pouted. No, I want to go with you alone. It's much more fun when we're together. Scott groaned. But you never like anything, and you try on everything in the store only to end up choosing the first thing you tried. Allison crossed her arms and sulked. Fine. If you don't want to go, I'll just shop with the girls another time. Scott saw her expression and realized she was upset. With a sigh, he gave in. All right, we'll go shopping. Just promise me you'll be quick. Allison's face lit up as she hugged his arm. Thank you. And since you agreed, I'll let you pick an outfit for me. I'll wear it tonight, and maybe Wild Allison can make an appearance again. Peter coughed in the background, and Allison blushed before quickly running to the door. Scott glared at Peter, who was smirking. "You should get that cough checked out, Peter. It might be deadly." With that, Scott followed Allison out of the loft. Derek looked at Peter and said, "Did you really have to ruin their moment? Are you trying to get yourself beaten up?" Peter panicked. "Damn it. I always forget he's a monster." Scott woke up and glanced at Allison, who was still sleeping beside him. Smirking, he gently used her hair to tickle her face and whispered, "Wake up, sleepyhead. We're going to be late for our first day back to school." Allison groaned, covering her face with the blanket. "Just a little longer." She mumbled. Scott chuckled. "Didn't you say you needed to pick up Malia from your house?" Allison peeked out from under the blanket. "Nope. Stiles said he'd pick her up." Scott sighed, getting out of bed. "All right, I'll call you after I make breakfast." He headed to the bathroom, took a quick shower, and then made breakfast. Just as he finished, Allison walked into the kitchen, joining him, Isaac, Melissa, and Erica, who had spent the night with Isaac. Melissa sipped her coffee and asked, "Scott, why was Derek looking for you?" Scott leaned against the counter. His two betas were kidnapped by a new pack in town. Allison said, "And guess what? They're all alphas." Erica blinked in surprise. "Another pack of alphas?" Scott grinned. "Exactly. Which means you, Isaac, Malia, and Uncle Noah finally have the opportunity to become alphas yourselves." Isaac smirked. "Great. When do we hunt them?" Scott shook his head. "There's no rush. If we take them down, we need to do it all at once and make sure none of them escape. But what really concerns me is whatever's making the animals go crazy." Erica frowned. "Lydia told me her dog attacked her yesterday. She thought it was weird since her dog has never been aggressive before." Scott exhaled. "I just hope whatever it is doesn't kill too many people before we can stop it." After finishing breakfast, the four of them drove to school. Arriving at school, the four of them met up with the rest of the pack in the hallways. After greeting each other, Allison walked over to Lydia. "What's up?" Lydia smirked. "Just checking out the new freshman." Allison chuckled. "Are you looking for a boyfriend?" Lydia scoffed. "Not really, no. Just looking." Meanwhile, Scott turned to Malia. "So, how does school feel so far?" Stiles, standing beside her, frantically shook his head, silently begging Scott not to ask. Malia groaned. "It feels like I'm in prison, and they're going to torture me by making me read. How do you think I feel, Scott?" Scott scratched his head awkwardly and quickly turned to Boyd. Boyd, say something." Caught off guard, Boyd shrugged. "School's not that bad." Malia narrowed her eyes and let out a low growl. Boyd immediately shut his mouth. Allison sighed. "Malia, remember, no growling at school. And if you really don't want to be here, you can always go home and let Mom homeschool you." Malia visibly shivered. No. She's way too mean. I actually like school." The group burst into laughter. As they laughed, Lydia suddenly stopped and glanced down the hallway. Two identical boys were walking toward them. She tilted her head. "Wow, twins. But I don't like the way they make me feel. They're not evil, but they're definitely not good people either." Scott followed her gaze and smirked. "Oh, they're both alphas. I think they're part of the pack Derek warned us about." Boyd crossed his arms. "They look arrogant. Should I teach them a lesson?" Scott shook his head. "Not now. Let's just get to class." Scott and his pack entered the classroom and took their seats. Moments later, everyone's phones buzzed simultaneously with a new message. Soon, their new English teacher walked in. She placed her books on the desk and began reading aloud the text she had just sent to the students. The offing was barred by a black bank of clouds, and the tranquil waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth flowed somber under an overcast sky. She paused, sensing something was off. Looking up, she found Scott and his pack staring at her with unsettling smiles, and Malia's eyes even glowed. Scott smirked and smoothly finished the passage for her. Seemed to lead into the heart of an immense darkness. Jennifer coughed awkwardly. Then, Thank you, McCall. Scott leaned back in his chair, still smirking. You're welcome, teacher. Jennifer's heart pounded. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Scott and his pack. Damn it. I need to get out of here. I can feel it. These monsters want to kill me. But how do they know what I am? After that, she began teaching but kept a close eye on Scott and his pack, especially Malia and Styles. Malia was watching her like a predator stalking prey, while Styles gave her one of his signature creepy smiles. Not long after, a crow smacked into the closed classroom window, leaving behind a smear of blood and feathers. Jennifer turned from the blackboard, where she had been assigning homework, and walked to the window. Her eyes widened as she spotted a massive flock of crows rapidly approaching the school. A thought flashed through her mind. This is my chance to escape. Then, the crows began striking the windows with relentless force, their bodies slamming into the glass until a few shattered. Chaos erupted in the classroom, and students screamed and ducked for cover. Amidst the panic, Jennifer seized the opportunity and bolted from the classroom. At that moment, Lydia snapped back to her senses and quickly used her ability to control the crows, mentally commanding them to disperse. As the birds retreated, she spoke to the pack telepathically. They were here because of the teacher. It's like she's something unnatural, that's what I felt from them. Scott scanned the room and sent a telepathic message to his pack. She escaped. We need to find her. Isaac, Styles, and Boyd, come with me. Girls, take care of the students. With that, Scott and the boys rushed out in pursuit of Jennifer. But despite their efforts, they returned empty-handed. The girls immediately approached, and Allison asked, "Did you find her?" Scott shook his head. No. She knows how to cover her tracks. Even her scent is completely gone. Lydia frowned. What is she, anyway? I don't know. Scott exhaled sharply. But you all felt it when she walked into the classroom, right? She doesn't feel right. Before they could speculate further, Chris and Sheriff Stilinski arrived. Scott quickly filled them in about the teacher. Her name is Jennifer Blake. I'll put out a bolo for her. Sheriff Stilinski said. After the bird incident, the principal dismissed Scott's class for the rest of the day, instructing them to go home. As Scott and his pack exited the school, a woman came running toward them, looking frantic. Which one of you is Scott McCall? She demanded. Scott stepped forward. That would be me. What do you want? I came to warn you about Deucalion. The woman said, catching her breath. He's here for you. Scott asked. What does he want from me? He wants to get rid of you. She replied. He's afraid of what you are, a true alpha. She hesitated before adding. Yesterday, I managed to save one of Derek's betas, Jackson. But there's still 2 others being held captive there, you can tell Derek. Before Scott could respond, the woman's eyes darted past him. She stiffened. They're here. She whispered. Scott followed her gaze and saw the twin brothers approaching. And before she could bolt, he grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. Where are you going in such a hurry? He asked. You still haven't told me your name or where you found Jackson. The woman said. I need to go. They'll kill me if they catch me. Scott smirked. Don't worry about them. With us here, they won't dare lay a hand on you. Because if they try, they'll lose their lives. Hearing this, one of the twins, Aiden, growled and took a threatening step forward, but his brother Ethan held him back. Aiden, stop. Ethan said. Remember what Deucalion told us. Let's go. Reluctantly, Aiden backed down, and the twins turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Scott released the woman's wrist and asked again. Your name? She hesitated before answering. Braden. Allison narrowed her eyes. You're not supernatural. Are you a hunter? Braden shook her head. No. I'm a mercenary. Styles raised an eyebrow. A mercenary? Then who hired you to save Jackson? Braden's lips pressed into a thin line. I can't tell you that. Scott sighed. Fair enough. Let's get out of here first. We'll meet up with Derek. And by the way, you can stick with us for a while. You'll be safer that way. Braden considered his words, then nodded. Okay. I have nowhere else to go anyway, and the sheriff confiscated all my weapons. Styles grinned. Let's see if you're actually a good person first. Then, maybe I'll ask him to give your stuff back. Malia scoffed. And how exactly would you know if she's a good person, dork? Braden smiled charmingly at Styles. I am a good person, little dork. Malia's eyes flashed, and she growled at Braden. Don't call him that. He's my little dork. And don't smile at him either. Braden raised her hands in surrender. Okay. No need to growl at me. Allison chuckled. Relax, Malia. No one's trying to steal your idiot boyfriend. Malia huffed. Good. Because I will kill anyone who tries to take away my idiot little dork. Styles smirked. Ouch, Malia. Your words hurt. Malia shot him a glare. He quickly corrected himself. I mean, you can call me whatever you want, babe. Braden laughed. You'd kill someone for him? Allison nodded knowingly. If I were you, I'd believe her. Malia doesn't do sarcasm. She always says exactly what she feels. Scott shook his head with a small smile as he pulled out his phone and dialed Derek's number. As soon as the call connected, he said, I assume you already found Jackson? Derek's voice came through the line. Yeah, but he's with his parents. I can't get to him right now. Meet us at your old house. Scott said. We have the girl who saved him with us, and she knows where Deucalion is keeping your other puppy. Derek exhaled. Got it. I'll meet you there. Jennifer's POV after escaping from the classroom. Jennifer concealed herself with an invisible energy barrier and used all her strength to run. She sprinted to her car, got in, and sped away from the school. She drove for a while, making sure she wasn't being followed, before heading to a house in town. Parking outside, she stepped out, marched to the door, and knocked. A man opened it, his expression neutral until he noticed her anger. What's wrong, Julia? He asked. Jennifer's eyes flashed with fury. I told you not to call me that, Sloane. As she stepped inside, her beautiful face twisted and changed. 3 deep scars slashed across her features, and her lips vanished, leaving her disfigured. Without hesitation, she rushed to a nearby room, threw on a black cloak, and pulled the hood over her ruined face. When she returned to the living room, Sloane was sitting with another man and 2 women, all watching her curiously. Sloane leaned forward. Care to tell us what happened to you? And why do you look like that? Jennifer's hands clenched into fists. It's Scott and his pack. She hissed. The moment they saw me, it was as if they knew I was a Dirac. I could feel it. They all wanted to kill me. If it weren't for the other students being there, I'd be dead by now. And to escape, I had to burn through all the energy I absorbed from the last sacrifice. Now, I can't even maintain my beautiful appearance. A woman named Nyamai frowned. But isn't Scott a true alpha? The legend says a true alpha never kills people. Jennifer sank onto the couch. I don't know what to tell you, Nyamai, but I'm certain that if I had been alone with those monster kids, they would have killed me. And the feeling I got from them, it was far scarier than anything I ever felt from Deucalion and his pack. Another man, Kenneth, scoffed. I told you they were dangerous. When I went to spy on Scott's mother and that red-haired girl, the moment I looked at them from the woods, they noticed me instantly. If I had stayed a second longer, they would have killed me. But none of you believed me. Sloane waved him off. You said you didn't see them shift or anything. You ran before they even looked at you. For all we know, they didn't even notice you. You just got spooked and bolted. They could just be normal humans. Kenneth shook his head. I'm telling you, man, they are definitely not normal. Sloane smirked. If you say so. A woman named Vivian, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. At first, I thought we could use the true alpha's blood for the summoning ritual, but it looks like he and his pack are too strong. For now, let's focus on getting Deucalion's blood instead. Jennifer frowned. But we're not strong enough to take on Deucalion and his pack yet, Vivian. Vivian's lips curled into a smirk. Then we keep feeding the Nemeton with more life force. Once it's strong enough, we'll absorb its power and make ourselves stronger. Sloane rolled his eyes. It's called a sacrifice, Vivian. Show some professionalism as a Dirac, would you? Vivian shot him a glare. Shut up, Sloane. Jennifer exhaled sharply. I don't think we can catch people and kill them in Beacon Hills without Scott and his pack finding us. Vivian shrugged. Then we try. If Scott and his pack interfere, we hunt outside Beacon Hills. We bring people back alive and kill them all on top of the Nemeton at once. Personally, I think that's a much better option than relying on those stupid telluric currents and their convergence nonsense. Nyamai frowned. We should stick to the ritual. Vivian scoffed. That's just bullshit. My way is faster and more efficient. Kenneth nodded in agreement. I'm with Vivian on this one. The end result is the same, so why waste time with old traditions? Jennifer stood abruptly. Whatever we do, we need to start hunting now. I need to regain my beauty first. Vivian shook her head. Not today. We should lie low for a while. Jennifer's eyes burned with frustration. Easy for you to say, you're not the one with an ugly face. Sloane placed a hand on her shoulder. Calm down, Jennifer. Vivian is right. Scott and his pack are probably looking for you as we speak. We need to stay hidden for now. Jennifer clenched her jaw, then let out a long sigh before sinking back into her seat. The twins' POV after walking away from Scott and his pack, Aiden and Ethan headed to the lacrosse field, where Deucalion and the rest of their pack were waiting. Deucalion turned toward them. Where is she? Aiden answered. She left with Scott and his pack. And you told us not to fight him for now. Deucalion sighed. Well, it matters not. Since she left, there's nothing else to do here. Let's go. Callie frowned. But she knows where we're keeping Derek's betas. She'll lead them there, and they'll rescue them. Deucalion smirked. Let them. Tonight is the full moon. Even if they save them, they'll lose control and try to kill anything in their way. If Derek wants to stop them, he'll have to kill them himself. Although I would have preferred to trap him in the vault with them and make sure he kills them, this outcome works just as well. Aiden clenched his fists. When are we going after Scott? He and his pack are too arrogant. I really want to teach them a lesson and make Scott kill some of them. Deucalion snapped his head toward Aiden and, without warning, struck him across the face with his cane. When I say so. Or are you questioning my will? Aiden lowered his head. No. I'm sorry. Ethan hesitated before speaking. Deucalion, something about Scott and his pack feels off. Deucalion raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ethan took a deep breath. First of all, they showed no fear or panic when they saw us. They knew Aiden and I were both alphas, yet one of Scott's betas said he wanted to teach us a lesson. And the way 3 others looked at us, it was like we were prey. Ennis scoffed. They're just a bunch of arrogant teenage betas who don't know their place. Ethan shook his head. That's the problem. They don't feel like betas. The feeling I got from them. He trailed off, as if struggling to put it into words. Deucalion said. We don't have all day. Spit it out. Ethan exhaled sharply. When I first saw them, every instinct in me was screaming to run. Especially Scott. He feels dangerous. Very dangerous. Ennis sneered. I didn't know you were such a coward, Ethan. Are you seriously afraid of a pack of teenagers who just became werewolves? Aiden glared at him. Ethan isn't a coward. And what he's saying is true. But I don't think they're strong. I think someone in Scott's pack isn't a werewolf. Something else. Something that makes people feel fear. We need to figure out what we're dealing with. Callie nodded. We know Scott is a true alpha. Marin confirmed that. But it wouldn't hurt to learn more about his pack. Deucalion was silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then he said, let's not concern ourselves with them for now. Our priority is bringing Derek into our pack. With that, Deucalion and his pack left the school.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.